They wanted to find out how abnormal blood sugar can impact how we relate to one another, in particular in intimate relationships. These foods look like certain human body parts, but do they actually support them? It's how you do it. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it. They wanted to find out how abnormal blood sugar can impact how we relate to one another, in particular in intimate relationships. So what they did was they collected a group of couples and they gave them blood glucose monitors, and they also gave them voodoo dolls. All right, now this is all gonna tie together in a moment. So what they wanted to find out was, how do people respond when their blood sugar crashed? And why does this matter? Well, first and foremost, here in our culture today, blood sugar abnormalities are the norm. So abnormal blood sugar is normal. And to kind of highlight that point, if we look at some of the data that we have right now, about 130 million Americans are either type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic right now. So that's chronic abnormal blood sugar. But this can happen to any and all of us at any time if we interact with foods that really make our blood sugar go a little bit bonkers. And so, for example, what most folks experience when ingesting, for example, one of my favorites growing up, which was Pop-Tarts. All right, Pop-Tarts with the sprinkles on top. When those came out, that was my jam. What happens when we eat a food like that is we get an imminent blood sugar spike, and we might have a little bit of a buzz, a little bit of jolt of energy, but inherently we also have the impending blood sugar crash that comes along with it, because the body tends to overcompensate when working to normalize blood sugar. Your body takes blood sugar very, very seriously. This is very primitive, primal programming, because our blood sugar needs to be stable to keep us aware in our environment if we need to fight or flee. So we're talking about very primitive programming that we still have very much alive and well within us today. But we don't kind of exist in those conditions where we might need to get up and run from a bear or a saber-toothed tiger, but that programming is still there. Your body wants to keep blood sugar on point so that it can make sure to move your major muscles and also keep your brain as sharp as possible if you need to avoid danger. So when your blood sugar spikes, insulin and other hormones kick in the hyperactive gear to clean up your bloodstream and to get all that sugar into the cells and out of the bloodstream where it can cause a lot of damage. Having a lot of abnormal glucose in the blood, a good similarity or good analogy is kind of like having little shards of glass roaming freely and in essence tearing things up. This is why in particular smaller capillaries tend to get damaged pretty easily once we get into a place of insulin resistance, like conditions we see with type 2 diabetes, where folks start to lose their vision or having to have toes amputated and the like. So having high blood sugar can be very dangerous. So again, your body kicks in a hyper gear to clean up the bloodstream. Now here's the issue. It overcompensates and now the blood sugar crash takes place. And that's all good. Your body has mechanisms to get that back to normal as well. And it's really, really good at this piece. What it does to get your blood sugar back to normal is it releases what are known as catecholamines, also known as stress hormones. So things like adrenaline and cortisol to get it back to baseline. No harm, no foul. Or is it? Because here's the side effect of these catecholamines, of these stress hormones. It can make us a little bit irritable, maybe even a lot irritable. And so in this study, here's what the researchers found. After controlling for baseline levels of relationship satisfaction, so whether the relationship was a loving, passionate relationship or it was on the rocks, regardless of those parameters, whenever the test participants had abnormal blood sugar crashes, they were far more likely to be aggressive towards their partner, less patient, less likely to perspective take, and far less likely to resolve their relationship conflicts. And at the end of the day, what's the outcome? What's the result we're looking for? And the result is not good. At the end of the day, not being able to solve the conflict, that's the ultimate price that we're paying. So again, they were given these little dolls and instructed to put as many pins into the doll to demonstrate how aggressive or angry you feel towards your partner. And sure enough, after monitoring their blood sugar, and monitoring their responses towards how they felt about their partner, there was a direct connection there. The more abnormal blood sugar, the lower the blood sugar crashes that take place. Again, regular behavior in our culture, the more aggressive people felt towards their partners. Now, just imagine how that outpictures in the real world all the time, and we have no idea that this is happening. We think we're being logical and rational when we're having these heated conversations, quote, heated conversations with our loved one. And a lot of times we're not even showing up as our normal self, our quote, normal self. And what are some of the things that are going on here? Well, additional research, and this was published in the journal Frontiers in Endocrinology, revealed that dramatic changes in blood sugar, shifting from high blood sugar spike to an impending crash, can increase anxiety and trigger hyperactivity in the amygdala. So number one, going from that blood sugar spike to a blood sugar crash triggers increased anxiety and also triggers increased hyperactivity in the amygdala. All right, we call this an amygdala hijack. All right, the amygdala is an incredibly important part of the human brain, and we sort of evolved multiple brains on top of more kind of original brains, right? We have the very evolved prefrontal cortex that really makes us human, who we are, but the amygdala is part of our primal brain, our primal programming, and it's really more regarded and functioning with things around survival, specifically survival of self. All right. It's much more reactive part of the brain, but it's really about protection. And it also plays a major role in being influenced and modulated by stress. So that part of the brain becomes hyperactive when we have a blood sugar spike and the impending crash. All right. Now, in addition to that, some of the latest research that we have, here's some other issues when we have hyperactivity in the amygdala. This has been found to directly reduce memory recall. All right, so our memory gets a little bit shoddy. It's more difficult to recall memories. So when we have an amygdala hijack take place, this is when our far more forgetful self jumps into the driver's seat. It's like Grand Theft Auto, and it jumps in the driver's seat, and it doesn't really know where it's going. All right. So that's one thing that happens. Also, hyperactivity in the amygdala has been found to lower inhibitory control. So what this means is the ability to delay or to even prevent acting on impulses. All right. Again, the amygdala is about reaction. It's about survival of self. It's about now, right now, nothing else matters. We got to make it. Today is the last day. We got to live to fight another one, potentially. Right? This is kind of the just that the amygdala is operating from. So what happens when we have that lowered inhibitory control, when we have this blood sugar crash, for example? This means that our ability to have forethought and to think, okay, if I do this thing or say this thing, what's the outcome going to be? And decide whether or not I want that outcome to happen and choose not to do the thing. So in the context of food, for example, a lot of times when we reach for lower quality food is when we have this blood sugar crash. And this is encouraged in our culture because one of the things that a lot of the data actually shows is that when people have a blood sugar crash, advising them to have high carbohydrate foods, have a little bit of sugar to bring that blood sugar back up. But then it's going to happen again, but this is what we're kind of trained to do. So that reduce inhibitory control, reaching for things we might not normally reach for, saying things we might not normally say. And also they found that hyperactivity in the amygdala has been found to just increase overall psychological distress. All right. So you're in a heightened state of stress and now you're in this conversation and it's just like adding fuel to the fire. We're already having psychological distress. We feel that things are much worse than they might be a lot of times. And then we outpicture that on the person in front of us, even if it's somebody that we love. So I wanted to kick things off and share that bit of data because we're going to dive so much deeper. And this is really a masterclass on understanding how our food affects our emotional output, how our food affects our emotional agility, our emotional intelligence, and also how food directly impacts our relationships in a family context, our relationships outside of our doors, out in the community, and even our relationships with ourselves. But stretching even wider, how our food affects the community at large. And also, we're going to dive into multiple real world, tangible, proven solutions for all these things. What's really fascinating about this is that this is well noted in the data now. We've got tons and tons of peer-reviewed evidence on how food affects our emotional stability. And we even have these cute little terms in popular culture like hangry, for example, right? A combination of hungry and angry. We know that it happens. We've got little commercials about it, but we're not really addressing how real it is because science is taking this very seriously, because that aggressive behavior could lead to making decisions that are not advantageous to us, our partners, or the people out in the community around us. How many decisions are we making? How are we interacting with people with our physiology and our biology really being at the helm and being disrupted and causing us to react in a certain way? So with this concept of hangry being in a popular culture, I really like to approach that with a framework and understand first and foremost that we are all subject to this. We are all subject to this happening. And I like to give the analogy, and this is what I talk about in my book, Eat Smarter. I give this framework to kind of identify your hangry representative, all right? And what I use is an analogy to identify your hangry monster inside, all right? So I'm going to give some details on each of these and try and identify which one you might fit into a little bit more. So what kind of hangry monster do you usually turn into? First of all, there's the Dracula type. The Dracula type has the cravings come out in the night. And for the Dracula type, they're very likely to say seductive things to get the food and drinks that they want. And they might even resort to biting if invoked. So that's the Dracula type. Cravings creep in during the nighttime. They might even say seductive things to get what they want. And they might bite you if you're not careful. So that's one type. Now, are you more of the invisible man or invisible woman type? This hangry personality type, when they're hangry, they just want to hide away. They don't want to be seen. They don't want to be bothered. Period. With a T on it. All right, period. That's the invisible man, invisible woman. When they're hangry, don't want to be seen, don't want to be bothered, leave me alone. Next up is the werewolf type. You're totally normal most of the time, but every so often, when hunger strikes, you can run off the rails, snap, and even bark at people. Are you more of the werewolf type when you get hangry? Frankenstein type. When you're hangry, you find yourself mindlessly pulled to crappy food. You're not trying to hurt anybody. You just want to eat and be left alone by the townspeople. But you'll step on someone if they get in your way. That's the Frankenstein type. And finally, we've got the mummy hangry type. When the mummy's hangry, they can get really unraveled. They don't hold it together very well at all. And they get a dusty attitude and they're not very fun to be around. So one of these frameworks, one of these hangry types, can you identify with one more than the other? I'll tell you right out of the gate, my wife is more of the Dracula type and I am more of the werewolf type. And if you've seen any of these movies recently, vampires and werewolves don't really get along that well. All right, shout out to Underworld. Now, being that my wife is more of a Dracula type, more of the vampire type, she will, in fact, say seductive things, especially in the nighttime, to get the snacks that she wants when she's in that vibe. All right, she basically proposes me that if I want to get these cakes, I'm going to have to get her some cake, right? Some chocolate cake. And one way or another, it comes out, and that is my task. You think I'm going to turn down finding a way to get that cake? And by the way, if I don't, if I bring up some kind of argument or try to curve that proposal, I might get bit. It might not be a physical bite, but it might be a bite of coldness, the good old cold shoulder that might come about, you know? So we can all fall into these things. But when she's in balance, typically she's not proposing, you know, throwing out seductive words and looks to get snacks. But any of us, again, can fall victim to our hangry representative. Me being more the werewolf type, when I'm hangry, if the hanger strikes, dog, I'm barking like a dog. All right, I could turn into that guy. All right, shout out to DMX. So identify your hangry representative. And most importantly, the reason I wanted to bring a little color to it, bring a little fun to it, is that this is happening all the time for us. And if we cannot acknowledge that we do in fact change when we are hangry, when our blood sugar is abnormal, when we're nutrient deficient, if we don't really understand that, we can continuously set ourselves up for a lifetime of conflict, oftentimes with people we love, and not even know why it's happening. Because truly, our biology trumps our rationality over and over and over again, and we don't even realize that it's happening. All right, so this is starting to create a little bit more empowerment by becoming aware of it. So start to have this practice of checking in with yourself when in conflict. When you feel like something is happening and you're just in your feelings and there's stress and intensity going on, this takes some work, what I'm about to share, but it is possible, and it's not just possible, it's probable and tangible by putting it into practice. And so one of those things, whenever we happen to have a conflict, my wife and I, she's my best friend, I love her so much, but sometimes we have issues. And oftentimes they're rooted in things that are just irrational, truly. The things that couples argue about are some of the craziest, silliest things. And if you can catch it in the moment and see how silly they often are, you know, that's another layer. But what I do is I run through a checklist in my mind. Sometimes I get to it faster than others, but I've gotten to a place where if there is a conflict, I tune in with myself and I ask, am I tired? Did I sleep well last night? Am I really stressed? Am I hungry? Am I hangry right now? Is that why I'm responding this way? Or is this why I feel so sensitive or feel attacked or whatever the case might be? Checking in with myself, doing this mental checklist. Am I tired? Am I excessively stressed? Am I sleep deprived? Have I not really been moving and I don't really have some healthy balance of endorphins? All of these things I check in with myself. Now here's the other part, but this comes with a caveat and some grace. Do that for your partner as well. This is hard. In the moment when things are inflamed, when things might be intense, and you just want to be right and you want them to be wrong, to have a little bit of grace and understanding and empathy, and do a checklist for them as well. Just think about it. Did they get a good night of sleep? Are they excessively stressed? Have they been running around and doing a lot of things and they just feel a little bit discombobulated? And maybe they've been out picturing that on you or creating a conflict, co-creating a conflict. Checking in for them as well and doing that checklist so you can bring a little bit more compassion into it, right? And even with that, if that happens, if the fire is already burning, it might be just a situation that is not just going to put the fire out, but it might dim it down a little bit enough so that you can bring a little bit more patience to the picture. All right. At the end of the day, these are all character traits that any great relationship is built on. Now, all of this has been in the context of our loving relationship, of relationship with our significant other. And then this can stretch out into our nuclear family as well, the people in our household, family members. But in reality, this stretches out to the community at large, how we're showing up and interacting with other people. And what we're going to dive into now, this research should be absolutely jaw-dropping for you. If you really, really understand the implications of what I'm about to share, this is a necessity and an absolute game changer for us to address this. Being that our nutrition has such a huge impact on our biological function, and being that our nutrition literally makes up, it is the raw building blocks to make up our hormones, our neurotransmitters, our neuropeptides, our organs, our cells, our heart, everything running through our veins, the blood itself, our internal organs, the list goes on and on. We are made from food, and our body is always striving to get these raw materials in, the base nutrients that it needs to regenerate us. It's a constant evolving practice of the body to drive us to bring these things in, just so that we have not just normal function, baseline, mediocre function, but really to operate at an optimal level. But what happens when we're deficient in these things? Understanding that these nutrients play a major role in the function of our brain, for example. We already highlighted data from the journal Frontiers in Endocrinology that revealed that changes in blood sugar, just that one simple principle, creates hyperactivity in the amygdala. And hyperactivity in the amygdala has been found to directly reduce memory recall, lower inhibitory control, which is the ability to delay or prevent acting on impulses, and also increases psychological distress. We already know this to be the case. And one of the other drivers of this hyperactivity in the amygdala and the deceleration of activity in the prefrontal cortex is nutrient deficiencies. And now what the research indicates is that these nutrient deficiencies lead directly to changes in our behavior and also changes in our tendency towards violence. Researchers at Oxford University conducted a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study to find out how nutrient deficiencies would affect a population of prison inmates. Now, within this population, we already have stereotypes on what that looks like. A tendency towards aggressive behavior, a tendency towards breaking laws, and a tendency towards violence. Now, what's advantageous about a study like this, although the circumstances are unfortunate, is that it's a ward study. So what that means is it's a controlled environment. And so the test subjects aren't just running out and getting some Jack in the Box or running out and going to Whole Foods and changing up the diet format and what was implemented in the study. And what the researchers wanted to do was find out how simply giving a group of prison inmates improved nutrition just through the form of increased amounts of vitamins and minerals in supplement form and also omega-3 fatty acids, just to see how that would stack up versus prison inmates who were given a placebo. So they gave one group increased nutrition, vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, and another group received a placebo to monitor the effects on their behavior over a multi-month study. And here's what they found. After compiling all of the data, the researchers found that the prison inmates who received improved nutrition had a 30% drop in behavioral offenses simply from that one implement, that one action of improving their nutrition. But what was especially eye-opening was that the prison inmates who received improved nutrition had a 37% drop in violent offenses. Almost a 40% drop in violence simply by improving their nutrition. Other researchers, other scientists saw this data and didn't believe it. They didn't believe this was possible. There's so many programs of rehabilitation and counseling and all these things that didn't compare remotely to the effects of improving the nutrition they were receiving. It didn't make any sense. So another group of scientists set out to redo the study themselves with another group of prison inmates. And this study was published in the journal Aggressive Behavior. And to the researchers' surprise, they got almost the exact same outcome with the number of violent incidences in the group receiving additional nutritional support dropped by a startling 34%. How is this possible? How is something like this possible? They did other analysis to find out, was there a change in character? Was there any other kinds of things that they can use to kind of explain this? But it was simply a matter of bringing in additional nourishment. And where this is really rooted, how something like this can happen, is really rooted in the human brain. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but nutrient deficiencies lead to hyperactivity in the more primal parts of the brain, namely the amygdala, and significantly reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain responsible for decision making, for social control, for distinguishing between right and wrong, for having forethought and being able to map it out. If I take this action, this thing's going to happen. Let me not choose that thing. It's like a governing force over that impulse control. It's the adult in the room being able to manage our behavior and our decisions. And when we're deprived on key nutrients, that part of the brain is literally starving. One of the more Captain Obvious ones. And this is the kidney bean resembling the kidneys. One of the major roles of the kidneys that most folks don't realize is in helping to manage the cardiovascular system. Your kidneys literally function as a filter to remove excess metabolic waste products from your system. They're incredibly important, and also helping to remove excess fluids from the system. And a big workload of filtering your blood is taken on by the kidneys. Your kidneys filter about 200 quarts of your blood each and every day. Your kidneys also, and how they really relate to the health of our blood and managing the cardiovascular system, your kidneys work along with your brain to manage your blood pressure. When we think about blood pressure, we tend to think about the heart, the arteries. Maybe we might consider that. We just think that that's all handling itself, but it's really your brain and your kidneys that are major regulators of what your circulatory system is doing. And so your kidneys and your brain are sending hormonal messages that either relax or constrict your blood vessels. This is how important our kidneys are. And to take it a step further, your kidneys actually produce the hormone erythropoietin. And to take it a step further, your kidneys actually produce the hormone erythropoietin that tells your bone marrow to make new red blood cells. So to make your red blood cells, your kidneys are the organ that's like sending the command for it to get done. Super, super powerful stuff. Now, when it comes to regulating the blood, it's no wonder that this powerful organ's namesake, the kidney bean, has some targeted effects. A randomized crossover trial published in the journal Nutrition, Metabolism, and Cardiovascular Diseases found that kidney beans elicit a positive effect on relaxing blood vessels for several hours after eating. Kidney beans are also a dense source of other healthy blood supporting compounds, things that are needed to literally build our blood, like iron and potassium. And they're also a great source of anthocyanins. All right, those anthocyanins that we talked about a little bit earlier in our conversation about blueberries. So and if we're talking about antioxidants, a great way to identify antioxidants in that spectrum is colors. So again, this doctrine of signatures, certain colors relate to certain antioxidants. So that kind of bluish reddish hue is a good indicator that it's going to be a source of anthocyanins, for example. So again, nature didn't come without instructions. And if we can tap into a little bit more of what our ancestors knew in our relationship with these foods in the human body, I think we're going to be better for it. So kidney beans, helping to benefit the kidneys through the dynamic of helping to relax the blood vessels and normalizing blood pressure, especially in the context of folks who have hypertension. So that is number 4 on our list of these incredible foods that resemble the body parts that they are good for. Next up on our list, now this one's going to be a little surprising because I don't think a lot of folks have actually seen this before. Now, recently, just within the last decade or so, a lot of folks have been able to have a new relationship with chocolate and start to understand the root of where chocolate comes from. Because growing up, we just saw it as candy, right? It's just like Three Musketeers, Mars, a Butterfinger, Twix, whatever. It's got the chocolate coating, or a Hershey's bar, right? So we've got chocolate candy. And we don't know where it comes from. We just think it's just chocolate. It's just made up. But chocolate actually comes from a powerful root. It comes from the root of cacao, right? So this, botanically, it's a pod that when you cut it open, there are a bunch of seeds within it that is covered with fruit. It's a fruit covering, but within it are what we call these chocolate beans, right? So the cacao beans are inside, covered by fruit. But again, you've got to see the YouTube video on this one. When you cut the pod open and you see that plethora of fruit-covered seeds within the cacao pod, it looks damn close to some teeth. It looks like that cacao pod is smiling at you, and it is super weird, all right? Chocolate and its root, cacao, is beneficial for our teeth. All right, now listen to this. A study conducted by researchers from the Department of Pediatric Dentistry at the University of Naples in Italy found that the polyphenols in chocolate have anti-cariogenic, aka anti-cavity effects. Specifically, the researchers found that chocolate polyphenols significantly reduce biofilm formation and acid production that is detrimental to our teeth. All right, again, you've got to see the video on this one to see how much it resembles teeth. It's really weird. Now, theobromine, specifically, and this is an alkaloid found in chocolate, is also well noted to have benefits for the cardiovascular system, but it also appears to have benefits for our teeth. A study published in the Dental Research Journal revealed that the theobromine in chocolate-based non-fluoride toothpaste outperformed 2 commercial fluoride toothpastes, including Kids Colgate, in defending against cavity-associated microbe activity. That's bananas. Brushing your teeth with chocolate compounds? Who knew? Who knew? Outperformed fluoride toothpaste, including Kids Colgate, which again comes along with a plethora of whatever. So understanding this compound, theobromine, but let me share this actually with you. This is a little fun fact. The compound theobromine is derived from the cacao tree itself. The name of the cacao tree, that's where the compound theobromine, this alkaloid, gets its name. The scientific name of the cacao tree itself is Theobroma cacao, right? Thus theobromine, but Theobroma cacao, which means food of the gods in Greek. Now let that dance around in your mental dance floor for a little bit. All right, shout out to Kevin Bacon, shout out to Footloose. The food of the gods, really, really cool. Now, overall, the tannins, polyphenols, and flavonoids found in dark chocolate and its origins, cacao, are protective of our teeth. Chocolate also contains a plethora of nutrients that are needed for healthy teeth and gums, like calcium, magnesium, and potassium. Again, mountains of peer-reviewed evidence demonstrate the benefits that high-quality chocolate have on things like cardiovascular health and brain health. And we've talked about this several times here on the Model Health Show. But its benefits for our teeth are another way that chocolate can put a smile on your face. Now, this really leans into the importance of the quality and source of chocolate. All right, this matters so much. When we're talking about these benefits, we're not talking about jamming down some Twix. We're not talking about jamming down, a Hershey's bar. We're talking about getting closer to the root of chocolate, the high quality chocolate, the root of cacao. So there are wonderful companies now that are making dark chocolate bars that aren't including a tremendous amount of heavily refined sugar and just going overboard in the process, the extraction process, the processing of the chocolate, to keeping it closer to its roots so that it has more bioavailable nutrients. So that's one aspect of it for sure. The next one of our powerful foods that resemble the human body part, that we now have peer-reviewed evidence on its benefit, is walnuts and the human brain. All right, now again, make sure to check out the YouTube version because it is uncanny how much a walnut looks like the brain. Now, strikingly, compounds found in walnuts have been shown to be remarkable in their effects on the human brain. Notably, compounds in walnuts have been shown to help scrub your brain clear of the harmful amyloid beta peptide that leads to bona fide amyloid plaque buildup in the brain. And this amyloid plaque buildup is associated with dementia and Alzheimer's and more. And walnuts have some protective benefits here. The data highlighted in the journal Neurochemical Research demonstrates that walnuts have the potential to reduce oxidative stress, reduce inflammation, and protect your brain cells from an early demise. Walnuts are packed with brain-healthy vitamins, minerals, and fats. And recent research from UCLA suggests that eating a handful of walnuts per day may actually help to boost memory. The research has found that walnuts appear to have benefits on improving memory, concentration, and the speed at which your brain processes information. Again, it's not just the structure of the brain and being protective of that, but also the functionality and that playing out in the real world with improved memory. Walnuts compact in their very own hard shell, like your cranium, for example. And again, it's another little bit of that's really interesting. That's an interesting coincidence. And without special equipment, it can be a really hard nut to crack. Now, also in that same lane of functionality and that whole body benefit, walnuts have been found to interact with the brain and other organs to coordinate the release of certain satiety hormones. So these hormones that help us to feel satisfied, to experience a sense of fullness and not be experiencing ravenous hunger, right? So these nuts, including walnuts, are a great category of foods that have really great benefits on our satiety hormones. But notably here in this context, walnuts. So not only do they look like the brain, they have beneficial impact on our brain cells as well. So with this, walnuts, again, super easy to use. You can snack on walnuts. We can add some to a smoothie. You can get yourself some walnut butter. Easy to add to trail mix, salads. You can obviously use them in a variety of culinary dishes. This is something simple to add to, snacks. So sprinkling on some yogurt, gluten-free oats, or whatever you're into. Walnuts, easy add-in, but the question is, are you using them because your brain really seems to like them? All right, we're gonna move on. We're at number 7 on our list of these 11 powerful foods that surprisingly resemble the organs in the human body that they have benefit for, clinically proven benefit. All right, now this next one is, we tend to think of our lungs simply as these air-filled sacs in our chest, right? We got these sacs in our chest, but there's a lot more than air going on in there. Within the lungs, helping to make the breathing magic happen are the bronchi, which strikingly resemble the larger stems of broccoli. The bronchioles, which mimic the way broccoli has smaller branches springing off from the large main branch, and the alveoli, which are the tiny air sacs at the end of the bronchioles that resemble the buds from the flowering head of the broccoli. Again, you've got to see the YouTube version to see just how similar broccoli looks to the inner workings of the lungs. Now, the lungs are incredibly complex and powerful. Take the alveoli, for example. These tiny buds are where the lungs and the blood exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide during the process of breathing in and breathing out. That's some seriously powerful activity happening in those tiny little buds. Now, they're tiny, but they are incredibly mighty in their performance. Now, how does the broccoli and lung health connection play out in the real world? Because again, once you see this similarity in their appearance, it's really, really crazy and cool, but how does this play out? Well, researchers at Johns Hopkins University found that sulforaphane, a plant chemical that is made by broccoli and other cruciferous vegetables, helps to restore the immune system pathways within the lungs that clean out harmful pathogens and reduce the risk of infections. Researchers at UCLA also noted the potent ability of sulforaphane to reduce inflammation, specifically in the lungs. Another study, and this was featured in the journal BMC Cancer, revealed some remarkable benefits in reducing lung cancer risk in smokers and former smokers. The researchers found that the isothiocyanates that are uniquely found in broccoli and other cruciferous vegetables have a cancer-modulating effect that defends the lungs against smoking-related damage. They noted that the isothiocyanates modulate carcinogen metabolism and facilitate carcinogen detoxification. That's really, really powerful. Now, circling back to the anti-inflammatory effects that broccoli compounds have on the lungs, I was shocked by how many peer-reviewed papers have come out recently analyzing the benefits that these broccoli compounds can have against COVID-19. I couldn't believe it. Like, who thinks of that? But I love it because this is the world that we live in right now. Yes, there's a lot of nonsense. Yes, a lot in medicine has been barking up the wrong tree. But there's so many folks now who are aware of the remarkable benefits and compounds that are found in foods that have just amazing benefits in the human body. Whereas food has largely been brushed off to the side in its importance in medicine, and negating the fact that our tissues are literally made from food. And we're trying to adjust and treat tissues with these external synthetic treatments, right? These newly invented treatments, not understanding that our tissues themselves are made from the things that we eat. So does food matter? Of course it matters. And now many researchers have really put this top of mind, and they're looking at things like this because, again, I was shocked. I couldn't believe how many studies were looking at these broccoli compounds and their relationship with COVID-19. Now, check this out. A report published in Trends in Pharmacological Sciences highlighted how sulforaphane acts upon the defensive pathways used by the lungs and other tissues that combat excessive inflammation triggered by COVID-19. Aha! Another study published in the World Allergy Organization journal titled Efficacy of Broccoli and Glucoraphanin in COVID-19. A paper, again, looking at broccoli and COVID-19. Who knew? Who thought of this? All right, so the title of the paper again was Efficacy of Broccoli and Glucoraphanin in COVID-19, from Hypothesis to Proof of Concept, with 3 experimental clinical cases. All right, so that's the title of the paper. And this paper analyzed several studies employing broccoli compounds in relationship to COVID-19. In one study, the scientists detailed that capsules of broccoli seeds containing glucoraphanin, so this is another one of these compounds that are abundant in broccoli, and they found that consuming these capsules of broccoli seeds containing glucoraphanin being taken before the onset of SARS-CoV-2 infection and were continued daily for over a month after the first COVID-19 symptoms. So they started taking them before, got the infection, and continued taking them. And the researchers stated that this intervention, consuming these broccoli concentrates, was found to reduce many of the symptoms of COVID-19 rapidly. Another aspect of the study found that the intervention led to a reduction in severity of cytokine storms. Now, I'll tell you, this doesn't sound real. Like broccoli versus COVID, it doesn't sound real. It doesn't, all right? Because our paradigm is such that, we're looking for a new drug, some kind of like science has to come together and we find this thing, and this doesn't fit into that paradigm. But the data exists, all right? It's really interesting. It's not saying that this is some curative agent, some magic end-all be-all, but there are some notable compounds in here that are helping to reduce inflammation and helping to reduce the severity of symptoms. So we should definitely acknowledge that. And this is why, again, there's multiple papers looking at this. And I was going to say, this is why we need to investigate this further. Because if this is beneficial here, what else can it be beneficial for? Now, the most concentrated form of these compounds, as kind of highlighted a little bit in that last study I mentioned, are the nutrients found not just in the broccoli itself, but in broccoli sprouts, which echoes the advice from Harvard researcher and founder of the Angiogenesis Society, Dr. William Li, who was on the Model Health Show several times and on recently to talk about COVID-19. And he's got some incredible insights very early on in this, and being able to get lung tissue from a cadaver and see the interaction that COVID-19 has on lung tissue, and finding that this is much more related to the capillary function, the endothelium, than what most folks realize. So this being more of a circulatory issue, not just this strictly respiratory condition. So really powerful stuff. We'll put that episode with Dr. William Li for you in the show notes. But he talked about on the show how powerful broccoli sprouts can be as a preventative and supportive agent in relationship to this infectious disease that's on everybody's minds. So really cool stuff there. Broccoli resembles the inner workings of our lungs. And just so happens there's a tremendous amount of peer-reviewed evidence showing that broccoli does, in fact, have benefits, substantial benefits for our lungs. So same tenet here. If we can get organic broccoli, all good. We can get fresh broccoli. Frozen broccoli is a super easy thing to always have on hand in the freezer. Combining broccoli with some high quality fats is going to, because there's going to be fat soluble nutrients in the broccoli as well. So, obviously broccoli is kind of a standalone thing, but broccoli, funny enough, can also be added. Some people add broccoli to, different soups and smoothies and things like that as well. I'm not saying to do that. I'm not saying that's delicious, but some folks do. But the broccoli sprouts, one of my mother-in-law's, one of my greatest teachers and mentors, she would put the broccoli sprouts right on top of the salad, looking like a whole bunch of Albert Einstein's hair on top of her salad, right? And then she'd tear that up. And then, so that got me interested in the sprout. So I got into the sprout life. So shout out to Mama Mukami. I appreciate you immensely, always. All right, so broccoli sprouts, broccoli added in. All right, we're gonna move on here. We're up to 8 here on our list of foods that resemble the human body, different parts of the human body. And this one is looking at something that resembles directly human blood. I don't think there's any natural, whole, real food that resembles blood more than beets. All right, beets. If you've ever seen a beet juiced or juice a beet yourself, it comes gushing out like a scene from Blade 3. All right, Blade 3, apparently, the progression of the Blade movies went downhill, but I like Blade 3. It's had Ryan Reynolds in it. It was great. I thought it was good. But shout out to Wesley Snipes. And it's coming. They're redoing it now as well. The Marvel Universe is bringing Blade into the thing. Arguably, Blade kicked off the new Marvel paradigm and gave them a lift to do what they're doing today, because Marvel at the time, they were selling off their rights and their properties, their characters left and right to try to stay afloat. But so, big shout out to Blade and to Wesley Snipes. Anyways, blood, back to blood. If anybody's like, what is Blade? He's a vampire. Okay. So beets and blood. Now, Obviously, the blood is also referred to as the river of life within our tissues, and it's transporting nutrients and oxygen everywhere that it needs to go to fuel, to provide nutrients to everything from our eyes to our spine to our toes. Thank you, blood, this river of life in our tissues, for doing the incredible job that it does. Now, how do beets, which again look like more than any other whole food, blood, it's kind of creepy, but how does this play out to benefiting our blood? Well, a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial analyzed the effects of beet juice on blood pressure and endothelial function of older adults. At the end of the 4-week study, the results demonstrated that the participants receiving beet juice had significant improvements in blood pressure and improvements in large vessel endothelial function. Now, circling back to a little bit of the science we talked about with COVID-19, the damage to our endothelial function that takes place with that, our body's response, these cytokine storms, our response to interacting with this particular virus, a lot of the damage is being done to our endothelium. And so seeing that beet juice, again, of all things, has benefits in supporting endothelial function and also improving blood pressure. What's going on here? The naturally occurring dietary nitrates in beets appear to readily improve levels of nitric oxide in the body and support overall cardiovascular performance. And this carries out into the domain of sports and exercise as well. And this is really one of the big places that beets are being utilized today, is in sports and sports performance. And there's some really cool data on this too. A study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology showed that drinking beet juice boosts stamina up to 16% during exercise and sports training. What? That's incredible. 16% increase in stamina. And also the study noted that the participants even experienced less muscle damage and less fatigue after the exercise and training was over. All right, really, really cool stuff. So this is operating on supporting our blood in a myriad of ways when we're talking about beets. Beets, again, I mentioned juicing beets. There are a lot of different supplements that include beets right now, but again, the quality and the sourcing of these things matter a lot. You can add beets to salads and different things as well. But it's just one of those really interesting things that has that direct, it looks, again, when you see beet juice, for example, it looks like blood, it looks like a pint of that B positive, but it really does have some benefits for supporting our blood in both managing blood pressure and in sports performance. So beets, now we're moving on to number 9 here. And number 9, we're keeping in the same domain the things that resonate and have a similarity with our blood and even our red blood cells. And this one is pomegranate. All right, pomegranate. A meta-analysis of 8 randomized controlled trials published in the journal Pharmacological Research detailed how pomegranates have antioxidant, antihypertensive, and anti-inflammatory effects, specifically in support of the cardiovascular system. And the study noted that drinking pomegranate juice consistently had blood pressure normalizing effects in test subjects. There it is, another one of those. This has risen in popularity recently. There's some commercial pomegranate juices out there, but you gotta be careful with the sugar content in these things. All right, now, little fun fact, this is crazy. I never experienced anything like this, but, I moved from the Midwest to California not that long ago. It's been about a year and a half, maybe. World has been nuts since getting here, but in this climate, in this part, this space on how where it's situated on the globe, certain things just grow here. A lot of folks have like avocados, like the next door neighbor has like orange trees and lemon trees and apple trees and all this stuff. Just walking down the street, you just see fruit just rolling down the street. Literally, I was walking yesterday morning and an orange fell off the tree, just rolled right up to me, creeped me out. All right, creeped me out. All right, so this is something very new to me. I didn't grow up with these kind of conditions, but earlier this year, I was outside in my backyard and I noticed there was this fruit hanging down from this bush, like right literally not that far from where I am. So I took a further investigation. I got a little closer with my curiosity and went over to pick a couple of them. And I found that one of them actually had a little bit of an entry point into it where a squirrel had gotten in there and was dining on that pomegranate goodness, probably getting that, that good blood circulation, and taking it back to his, squirrel companion. Never mind. And by the way, if you've seen on Instagram, that's another thing about LA. Like these squirrels are different here. Like St. Louis squirrels, they don't mess with people. Like if you're 100 yards away, they got caution. All right. Their yellow light comes up. All right. The squirrels in LA are different. You could walk right by and they're like, what you looking at, player? What is it? And so, but if you've seen on Instagram, I have a little squirrel buddy that comes up to me and literally is like eats out of my hand, which is, I know some people are like, don't do that. The squirrel, what if you get this or that? Just relax. But one day my little squirrel buddy came up to eat a little snack that I had for him. And his teeth were so red. And it just like creeped me out. I was like, did he just murder somebody? And I'm just like, I don't know about my fingers now. And I got very apprehensive. But he's probably jumping into that pomegranate that, was right there. So anyways, but there was a couple of other ones that weren't eaten into. And so I brought him in. My mother-in-law was here at the time. She actually, I believe she had one of them. But anyways, pomegranates are not that easy to get the nutrients out of because they're so like it's compartmentalized. It's kind of like this strange cellular world when you cut it open, and so you gotta scoop out the seeds, and then it takes a tremendous amount to make juice out of. And there's some other beneficial compounds in there that you might be able to extract in different ways than just juicing it and potentially losing some of the compounds. So anyways, this was very strange for me, very weird experience because also it comes up, especially coming from where I come from, where you never saw food just growing outside like that. There's a part that comes up like, okay, I'm picking this fruit, but is this FDA approved? Like, I don't know. Like there's a little bit of a apprehension. There's a little bit of reservation that comes up because of the association with food, you getting it from a place, an entity. And it's still there in me. I've had many experiences of like, going and getting food and, I've grown some things, but it's still there. Like that little ghost of Shawn Christmas past comes up and it's just like, ooh, the FDA. And now I know that the FDA really isn't, come on, you already know. By the way, about 40% of the funding for the FDA comes from pharmaceutical companies who then, they're approving the drug from the pharmaceutical companies. Let me stop. Let's not go down that track today. And the next one is sweet potato and the pancreas. Now, we're going to have, again, on the YouTube version, you could see some images of this. It's pretty striking. I actually took a picture of a sweet potato myself. I just went over it. We got a bunch of sweet potatoes sitting over there, and I went and picked one up. I was like, no way. It's even got the little curvature at the end of it, because the pancreas isn't a really respected organ, in our world. People, it's brain health, gut health, we've got the heart health. Pancreas needs more love. Pancreas is doing so many incredible things, and it's just a strange looking organ. But, the benefits, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, seen with this interaction with sweet potatoes and the pancreas are pretty crazy. Now, it's well noted that our pancreas is the home for the production of insulin. Specifically, the beta cells in our pancreas are making insulin, which insulin is needed to drive glucose into the cells. And having too much glucose floating around in our cells, in our bloodstream, and having too much glucose floating around in our bloodstream can be very, very detrimental and dangerous to our health. So insulin is critically important in that. And most importantly here in this conversation today is insulin sensitivity, because the beta cells can be producing insulin, but if our bodies are inundated with constant influx of sugar, then that signal, that messaging for insulin to be produced is still there, but the ability for the cells to retain their sensitivity to interacting with insulin to open the cell up for that energy to get shuttled into the cell, that can go down. It's sort of like your cells are getting spammed by insulin and it's starting to go to the junk mail now. So that insulin sensitivity is going down. And so having a high level of insulin sensitivity is important for managing issues that can result, we stress that up further and we see issues like type 2 diabetes, and which is somewhere in the ballpark of 90% of the cases of diabetes in our country. But then there's type 1 diabetes, where there's an absence of the production of insulin by the beta cells in the pancreas. So, there's a couple of issues here. And again, this is much more rare, but this is an autoimmune tied condition as well. There's a lot of things that we can do with our nutrition, with our sleep, with our movement practices that can help to support folks, even if they're experiencing that side of the equation as well. But we're specifically talking about the skyrocketing increase in type 2 diabetes in our world today and increases in insulin resistance. And so knowing these things, can sweet potato, being that it really mimics the appearance of the pancreas, if there was a food that's going to look like it, does it have any benefit here? Well, a study cited in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics found that the consumption of sweet potatoes can minimize insulin resistance and defend against high blood sugar in people who are suffering from diabetes. This exists. And I've got to share this with you because this is fascinating. A new study, and this was published in Food and Nutrition Research, analyzing the effects of white sweet potato on diabetic mice. So again, I wanted to share this because this is fascinating. This isn't a human resonance here, but of course, a lot of the stuff for, prior to human studies are using animal models. But listen to this again. Okay. So again, this is published in Food and Nutrition Research, analyzing the effects of white sweet potato on diabetic mice, found that the consumption of sweet potato actually triggered the creation of new pancreatic islets. Now, these are essentially small islands of cells in the pancreas that contain several types of cells, like the all-important alpha and beta cells. So it's literally creating these cells, these islands of cells that contain our alpha and beta cells. So we know the beta cells produce insulin, the alpha cells produce glucagon. And glucagon plays a major role in helping to, insulin is getting released to store energy. Glucagon is coming along to get that energy out of the cell to be used as fuel. All right. And so specifically, glucagon works a lot more with stored glycogen in the liver. But, I'm kind of geeking out on this right now. It's so crazy that this food has been found to trigger the production of the cells that make these hormones. What in the world? And again, further studies need to be done on this, but this is a new study, just came out recently, seeing this impact on mice, which is oftentimes mirrored in humans. But again, going back, we do have clinical evidence, specifically in human trials, on the consumption of sweet potatoes, minimizing insulin resistance and defending the body against high blood sugar. Now, there's many different types of sweet potatoes, everything from this study, again, included white sweet potato. What really common and also in clinical trials is the orange sweet potato. We've got purple sweet potatoes, We got the Japanese sweet potatoes, which would fall into that white, the potato goodness inside is white, but the outer portion is more of this kind of violet, reddish purple hue. So many different types of sweet potatoes, different nutrient profiles in each, great source of microbiome friendly fiber as well. The list goes on and on. Tons of different ways to utilize sweet potatoes, just kind of traditionally baking it and eating it. You can add a couple little condiments to it to make it even more tasty. You can use sweet potato as a replacement for so many things. You can make sweet potato muffins, sweet potato pancakes. You can use them in savory dishes as well. So, use them in stews, use them in, making your own burrito bowl, and, having sweet potato along with kidney beans in kind of a nice little chili. There's so many different ways to utilize these incredible foods, but the question is, are we using them? So hopefully this episode really helped to spark a new association, a new kinship with some of these foods that we've covered. And again, this is going into the doctrine of signatures and seeing, hey, we do know that there are these myths out there that these foods look like certain human body parts, but do they actually support them? Do they actually have any protective effects? Do they actually have any anti-aging effects, any effects that help to improve those organs? And today we went through a lot of the peer-reviewed evidence that shows wow, there is some really cool connections with it. And so this brings into the conversation that we had with biochemist Dr. Sylvia Tara, who was on the show, and we'll put her episode in the show notes a while back. And she talked about thinking about your body's use of energy, of storage of fat, just like we think about money. And just as currency is used for every exchange in our economy, energy is needed for every transaction in our bodies. Now, when we eat food, when we put food into our system, we instantly get some instant glucose cash on hand. All right, we got some instant currency, some glucose cash on hand, and it's in our bloodstream for easy access to get to it easily and quickly to run processes, to pay for metabolic things to happen. All right, your metabolic Gucci store, your metabolic Target, all right, is getting paid off when that food comes in, instant glucose cash on hand. Now, an excess of glucose, however, is not safe to be having around on hand. It's sort of like you're suddenly acting like you're Floyd Money Mayweather carrying around a briefcase of racks. Are you carrying those racks around unnecessarily, and you don't got the bodyguards? You don't need all that money. You get robbed. All right? So you need to store some of that glucose cash when an abundance of glucose comes into the body. And it's also if we're talking about biology, having so much, quote, sugar in our bloodstream, having a tremendous amount of glucose in our bloodstream is dangerous. It's dangerous. It can literally start to tear things up, especially for very sensitive capillaries. This is why we can see with insulin resistance and diabetes, losing the loss of circulation and function to the things that are kind of the extremities, the toes, and even, our vision, those areas that are sensitive, those blood vessels that are very sensitive to damage. They can really start to get broken down by having an excess of sugar roaming around in our bodies. And so storing that excess is a high priority of the body. So we got glucose cash on hand, but when there's an abundance, your body actually deposits that excess in your internal checking account in the form of glycogen in your muscles and liver. All right, so this is your body's metabolic checking account. And if you need it, you can still access it relatively quickly. You just got to take the time to write a check. Okay? Do you remember check? What happened to checks? I know checks are still out there, of course, but checks were the thing for quite a while there. And if you happen to go to the grocery store and it's somebody, they're writing a check, it's going to hold up the line. All right? It's going to take a little bit of time. Now, you've got cash on hand and your checking account is full. It's a good idea, if there's still excess, to store some of that energy away for safekeeping as a certificate of deposit. And this is when your food currency that you brought into your body gets stored as fat. It can hold a lot more energy in reserve. I already mentioned hundreds of thousands of caloric energy in the form of fat can get stored in the body. And it's there when you really need it, but it's not as easy to get to as the glucose cache on hand, the glycogen in the muscle and liver, and then the stored body fat. So your body goes through this hierarchy of utilization. And the process of withdrawing the energy from your fat to use it as fuel is often referred to as lipolysis. All right, lipolysis. And the process of storing fat in your body is often referred to as lipogenesis. All right, lipogenesis. Now remember, with excess energy coming in, you are generally not making new fat cells. You are filling up the fat cells with more and more moolah to use if the situation ever called for it. But the big takeaway from this is that your body works on a hierarchy. All right, it's kind of like accounting. So another class from college that I took that bared out in different ways, but it's going to bear out for me beneficial, not from what I thought it would, but in the realm of nutrition. There was LIFO, FIFO. That's last in, first out, and first in, first out. And with your body fat, it's working on a hierarchy of needs with the utilization of energy. The last in is the first thing to get used, right? What's already stored is stored body fat. And that's what we're typically targeting. We want to just use some of this energy that's hanging around on my body. But even though we've got all of this caloric energy, this stored energy in the form of fat, your body is going to, in comes another meal, in comes another source of nutrition, in comes another source of glucose. It's coming into the body. It's going to be the first thing to get used because it's easier. All right, your body is working on that hierarchy. Once that's not coming in, then it can shift over and start using some of that stored glycogen. And then it can finally start to burn through some of the stored body fat. So it sounds like an arduous process. Now, keep in mind, there are ways to supersede and get to that stored fat faster. All right, that's all in Eat Smarter as well. But, these are different things through our nutrition and our lifestyle that enable your body to go and snag up some of that stored fat a little bit quicker. But most importantly, it's if we were looking through the lens of prevention and not storing excessive fat in the first place, it always makes the process easier. All right, so I want to empower you so you understand how all of these steps work. All right, so if we want to get to that stored fat, that stored energy, we've got to have processes in place that encourage the process to happen. And also, if we feel nourished and we're not constantly putting more food in, because you think about it, if we're storing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of calories and fat on our bodies, so much energy that we can survive for months, on paper, all right? Why on earth would we still be hungry? Why would we still be hungry? And one of the big takeaways that you find out as you go through Eat Smart is that chronic nutrient deficiency leads to chronic overeating. Chronic abnormal activity of your hunger and satiety hormones leads to chronic overeating. These are all things that need to be accounted for, that are controlling your behaviors, that are controlling what these metabolic processes are doing. It's so much bigger than this calorie-focused paradigm of nutrition that has largely failed our society today. And so, again, we're putting the power into your hands. Now you understand how this process works, getting a fat bank account, basically. And now that we know how the energy is getting stored in the fat cell, let's talk a little bit about how we're going to move the fat out of the cell. Now, in Eat Smarter, in order to understand how this process of fat loss works in a really digestible way, pun intended, big pun intended, shout out to Big Pun, all right? I don't want to be a player no more. But to understand how this process really works in a digestible way, in a way that makes sense, it's really getting to the really powerful tenet of education, which is taking something that we don't know and connecting it to something that we do know. That's what learning really is. It's taking something that we don't know and connecting it to something that we do know. And so what I use as an analogy to understand how the process of fat loss works is going to the movies or going to see a play. And we use this paradigm of a metabolic theater where all of this action is actually taking place. Now, in this metabolic theater, in this domain of the fat cell itself, where, you're watching your favorite movie or you're watching your favorite comedian or favorite stage play. It's all happening in the fat cell itself, all right? So where some magic's happening, all right? Now, in order for the fat cell to get stored with energy, and that process of ushering in energy into that cell, there's a couple of key enzymes that are involved in all of these processes. So we talked about the process of what actually constitutes the stuff that fat cells getting stored with, right? Which is the triglycerides, all right? 3 fatty acids combined with 1 glycerol. And so those are getting shuttled into the cell by the boss in charge of all the ushers, telling everybody the theater's open, come on in, have a good time, and that's insulin. All right, insulin is opening the doors to the metabolic theater and allowing that fat to get stored. With the assistance of certain enzymes, there's enzymes like lipoprotein lipase that are involved in like moving fatty acids around to different domains. But in particular, now when talking about fat loss or ushering the fat out of the fat cell, we're talking about the enzyme called hormone sensitive lipase, or HSL, hormone sensitive lipase. Now, hormone sensitive lipase is like the little usher that's there to help move fat out of your cellular theater after the show is over. And again, without hormone sensitive lipase, and there's others as well, there's monoglyceride lipase, there's adipose triglyceride lipase, but hormone sensitive lipase is kind of like the leader of their little, like within any little clique at a job, there's like somebody who's kind of like the leader, all right, even though they don't got the title necessarily. All right, so hormone sensitive lipase, and it's responsible for the mobilization of free fatty acids from adipose tissue. Is triggered, this process of lipolysis, by hormone sensitive lipase. And it's easily acted upon by hormones it's called hormone sensitive for a reason. Hormones that we can influence can help hormone sensitive lipase to do its job more efficiently and effectively. And moving onward, if we have excess fat that we want to lose, we want hormone sensitive lipase and his buddies to be clocked in on the job and ready to put forth their best efforts. And now, even though hormone sensitive lipase is the head usher in charge of getting fat out of its seat, there are some other bosses who actually write their checks. And these are the managers of their departments. And their bosses are the twin brothers, insulin and glucagon, not identical. All right. And they're both from their loving mother, Miss Pancreas. All right. Now, even though they're brothers, they have 2 very different personalities. Insulin is more calculating, careful, always wanting to save up and stockpile because you never know when you're going to need it. It's all about safety and security. And he wants to keep the attendees in the seats, keep the fat cell theater full, and out of the aisles, by the way, which is the bloodstream, all right, out of the aisles in the fat cell. And glucagon, on the other hand, is really more of a free spirit in many ways. It believes in minimalism. We just use what we use. We just have what we need, and that's what we need, all right? Now, just to be clear, according to the Journal of Lipid Research, glucagon does have some influence on activating hormone-sensitive lipase. But hormone-sensitive lipase is primarily activated when insulin just sits its butt down. That's the primary trigger for hormone-sensitive lipase to do its job of getting folks out of the theater, is when insulin goes and takes a nap somewhere, just goes and relaxes. All right, that's when hormone-sensitive lipase is actually able to kick into gear. Glucagon is more specifically there and primarily producing and promoting hepatic fatty acid oxidation. So oxidation of fat in the liver. So that's its primary job that it's doing, what's noted in the data. So glucagon, so many of these things we're just beginning to understand. But many of these things we've had data on, but it's just becoming more and more expansive. Again, insulin, glucagon, and hormone-sensitive lipase all take proactive jobs at managing the doors of the cellular theaters and allowing fat in or out of the cells. And one of the biggest takeaways from today, and something that really allows the mobilization and activity of hormone-sensitive lipase to do its job, is glucagon's close friend he can pass off the keys to, named adrenaline. Adrenaline, also known as epinephrine. His teachers at school call him epinephrine. All right, that's his proper name. But his friends call him adrenaline. I just thought about Fast and Furious, the Vin Diesel, adrenaline, 1/4 mile at a time. Adrenaline loves to get fat out of the cellular theater, loves to get everyone cleared out so they can go and kick it at the after party when the show is over. Hormone-sensitive lipase and other ushers are really motivated to get fat out of the cell once adrenaline is around. But again, the primary activator of hormone-sensitive lipase and ushering the triglycerides out of the cell, lipolysis, breaking these fatty acids down to be used for energy, is simply by allowing insulin to stop roaming around. And insulin is going to be on guard, on job, whenever food stuff is coming in, particularly sugar, particularly high carbohydrate based foods. Just gets insulin being like that, that helicopter parent, that passenger seat driver, that overbearing manager, all right, just hovering over, constantly working too much. So as we move away and to employ some of these practices that we'll talk about, and also again, much more in depth and Eat Smarter. Even this cellular theater is much more in depth we talk about in the book, but I'm just giving you the rudimentary understanding of how this process is working. Okay, now that hormone-sensitive lipase is able to do its job, adrenaline is able to trigger and support doing this job, which again, adrenaline, AKA norepinephrine, we think of it as just in this terms of being this, quote, stress hormone. But stress is not, this term stress is universally considered to be bad, but it's not. Stress is a part of what makes us human and allows us to grow and to thrive and to survive. We're experiencing stress just by being here on this planet. Gravity is constantly putting pressure on our bodies. This is why if you've ever seen that movie or read the books around the story of John Carter, I believe Disney did that movie. But when he went to another planet, all of a sudden he's light as a feather. He's bouncing around. He's able to do all these crazy things. His body's been exercising, getting stressed by gravity, just the nature of being here on this planet. And the stress of movement and all these processes taking place. The stressing of exercising, which is incredibly beneficial for our metabolism. All of these things are hormetic stressors. So just to say stress is bad is a really terrible oversimplification. And just to be clear though, stress can really mess you up. Excessive stress. But we need stress in order for our body to do all the cool stuff that it can do. It just needs to be in balance. All right, now, this is very important. When we're talking about burning fat, when we're talking about, quote, burning fat, we just talked about lipolysis. That's the freeing of the fatty acids from the fat cell. Okay? That's lipolysis. That is not, quote, burning the fat. Lipolysis is a process of freeing the fat from the cellular theater, but it's actually burned for energy by your mitochondria at the cellular snack bar. That's where it really goes down. Your mitochondria are really the energy powerhouses of your cells. And the universal currency that your body is using, called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is what your mitochondria is making when it's taking that fat and, quote, burning it. That end destination of the fat being freed from the cell, the free fatty acids being freed, and actually leaving our system, quote, burning fat, happens in the mitochondria. It's a process called beta oxidation, all right? Because lipolysis, just breaking down fat to use as fuel, that's not enough. That's not burning fat. The majority, listen to this, this is incredibly important. The majority of fat freed through lipolysis is reabsorbed. Lipolysis isn't it. Of course, it's important. It's a step in the process. A study published in Endocrinology and Metabolism covered that 70% of released fatty acids are reabsorbed. They're reabsorbed. Who knew? This process of re-esterification is when the free fatty acids recombine with the glycerol and It's going to get stored in a fat cell. It's going to get stored and used for later energy. It says, quote, 70% of released fatty acids are re-esterified at rest, and this value decreases to 25%. So we go from 70% of fatty acids getting reabsorbed to only 25% of freed fatty acids getting reabsorbed within the first 30 minutes of exercise. When you exercise, it's unlocking some magical power, seemingly, in actually moving the fat out of the system, all right? In exercise, more than 1/2 of the increase in fat oxidation could be attributed to the reduction in the percentage of reabsorption. Okay, so it's not just you're burning fat through exercise. You're not reabsorbing the fat that's already been released. So I hope that makes sense. Now, these mitochondria are powerful. These are mighty, mighty entities in our cells. You can have hundreds, even thousands of mitochondria in a single cell. As a matter of fact, just a little fun fact for you, approximately 10% of your body weight is mitochondria. What? All right, that's a tweetable right there. That's a tweetable. Your mighty, mighty mitochondria. And truly, a big part of this process is supporting the function of these metabolic Biggie Smalls. These metabolic Biggie Smalls are a huge key to supporting your cellular theater. Now, there's other bosses, there's other entities involved in this metabolic theater, like your thyroid gland, for example. And the thyroid is producing hormones that control your metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn energy. And the thyroid gland is closely connected to the brain and the gut. And so what's going on with those two things deeply impacts the function of the thyroid and signaling all of these different things to happen. And so we dive into that a little bit deeper in Eat Smarter, but I want to give you an overarching understanding of this metabolic theater and how this process actually happens. And once the fat makes its way to the mitochondria to be used as fuel and burned through beta oxidation, where does it go? Where, oh, where has that little fat gone? I think the closest approximation that people can think about, just rationally what we kind of see in the world, and thinking about fat being evicted from our bodies is through the appearance of sweat. All right, that's what we think, that our fat cells are having a good breakup cry and they're just leaving our bodies, and you know, it's a sad experience. They're sad to go, but you're happy to see it. So are we losing our fat through sweat, or is there something else happening? As mentioned, when we attempt to, quote, lose fat, what we're really attempting to do is to metabolize these triglycerides. Again, triglycerides are comprised of 3 types of atoms: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And triglycerides can only be broken down by unlocking these atoms through the process of oxidation. Now, here's how fat is able to vanish into thin air. A peer-reviewed study published in the BMJ, where scientists decided to follow the path of these 3 atoms as they are leaving the body. They discovered that when 10 kilograms of fat is oxidized, 8.4 kilograms of that fat is excreted as carbon dioxide via the lungs, while just 1.6 kilograms was released as water. So in other words, approximately 84% of the fat you lose is eliminated through your breath when you breathe out. And only about 16% of the fat you lose is through sweat, urine, and other fluids, even tears from your eyes. It's a little bit of fat leaving. These calculations revealed that the lungs are the primary excretory organ for fat. Plus, if that weren't enough, the researchers estimate that about 1/3 of the weight loss happens as you breathe during a full night of sleep. Okay, so most of the fat, how it's vanishing into thin air, literally is because we're breathing it out. This doesn't mean that breathing faster, doing the breath of fire, the chaotic breathing is going to help you to burn more fat. That's not what it's about. That's just an endpoint. It's the door leaving the body. That's all that is. All of this stuff has to happen beforehand, which largely relates to our nutrition and our lifestyle. So now that we have a really good rudimentary understanding of how the process of fat loss works, how our cellular theater is functioning, how we have different fat cell communities, how our fat cells are getting stored in the first place, now we're going to cover some of the specific foods and nutrients and a way of eating. We'll start with that first, that supports this fat loss process, that supports your fat loss related hormones and enzymes. But one of the most overarching nutrition principles is seen in the data, which is to simply keep insulin in balance. Again, that's when everything is kicking into gear. The enzymes that do all these cool processes of fat metabolism, kicking it off, happens when insulin can sit down, relax, and take a break. So knowing that insulin is largely triggered by carbohydrate intake and sugar, not that carbohydrates are bad. We're not saying that, but we have a very carbohydrate dominant society, and largely refined processed carbohydrates. And even once we get into the whole grains, we can take that too far as well, because that's what I was taught again in my conventional, private, expensive university nutrition science class. I was paid to be miseducated. I was taught 7 to 11 servings of whole grains, and my teacher was bordering on obesity himself. He was not secretly mainlining Cheeto dust and Pop-Tarts, all right? He was doing the thing that he was teaching, but because of the role that insulin plays, for example, with that carbohydrate coming in, it might be too much. And you kick into that process, again, glucose cash on hand, writing checks over, depositing in the glycogen in the liver and the muscles, and getting stored as certificates of deposit in fat cells. It can happen easily with the typical meal here in the US. And so what if we just shift this ratio a little bit? Just shift the ratio, since we know that the big driver of insulin, which dietary fats and proteins can also stimulate the activity of insulin, but not even remotely as close as carbohydrate and sugar can. So what do? How does this work? Does it work? A study cited in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition revealed that simply lowering the study participants' ratio of carbs and increasing their ratio of protein without changing calorie intake, please hear that, without changing calorie intake, led to higher levels of satiety, a higher resting metabolic rate, and higher levels of fat oxidation. The fat actually getting burned without changing calorie intake, simply shifting that ratio. I didn't say no carbs. I didn't say even low carbs. Could be. But just lowering that ratio and increasing the ratio of protein create a favorable change in the metabolism. Now, what if we take this tenet of simply shifting our carb ratio just for one meal of the day, specifically to start the day, the first meal that you have, because you're, quote, breaking your fast. Your body's metabolism is in a very influential state at that point. And this is conducted by researchers at St. Louis University and published in the International Journal of Obesity. They sought to discover what happens with fat loss when you eat a high carbohydrate breakfast versus a high protein / fat breakfast, when the calorie count of the meals are exactly the same. They stay the same, but just talking about the main macronutrient coming in. Now, for the high carbohydrate breakfast, it's a breakfast that I've had many a day. Many people have for their breakfast. Bagel. Of course, you might be like, well, it's not a high quality carbohydrate. Even if it's a whole grain bagel, we can get into nuance about this, but this is what's used in the study. And then for the high protein / high fat breakfast, it was eggs. Now, the researchers did have the study participants to decrease their overall caloric intake by 1,000 calories a day in this study, but had different people use different macronutrient ratios just for their first meal. And here's what they found after an 8-week study period. Even though the calories on the diets were the same, the study participants in the lower carb breakfast group showed a 61% greater reduction in body mass index, a 65% greater weight loss, a 34% greater reduction in waist circumference, and a 16% greater reduction in body fat percentage, actual fat loss. Calories the same, changing that macronutrient ratio, which influences insulin, which influences hormone-sensitive lipase and glucagon and all the things we're talking about. This is a tenet that we can take advantage of. Does this mean you can't have your favorite breakfast even if it's a higher carbohydrate? No, this doesn't mean that. You can do what works for you, what feels good. But for some people, this might be like, oh, wow. I've been doing this thing this whole time and I haven't really been getting the results that I want. Maybe let me try shifting this macronutrient ratio. Because I promise you, any smarter you learn how to take advantage and enjoy your carbohydrates. It's just how you do it. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it. I want to move on to something that isn't a taste in a sense, but it's more of a food experience that gives us more of like a feeling than anything else. How in the world do spicy foods turn up the heat in our mouth and in our bodies? How is that happening? And I'd imagine, I unconsciously thought this, that most folks would think that the, quote, burn of spicy foods is a form of taste. But again, it's more of a feeling. In fact, the two sensory experiences are related, so our taste and that feeling experience, which we'll talk about more, but they're also very distinct. Spicy foods innervate the tongue in the same way, interacting with the papillae. But there's an additional pain system that is triggered by compounds in spicy food that are located everywhere throughout the body, not just your tongue. So you can have the experience of this kind of thermal effect everywhere. Capsaicin is the main active ingredient in spicy food, and it binds to a special class of receptors inside of our mouth called VR1 receptors. Now, these are specialized pain receptors that respond to temperature extremes and intense mechanical stimulation, such as pinching and cutting, and it signals your brain to try to protect you from those things. These receptors also respond to very specific chemical influences, like those from capsaicin. So when we consume capsaicin, our central nervous system can be confused or tricked in a sense when these pain fibers get stimulated as if something physically hot is touching your mouth. And you need to release the body's internal and external sprinkler system to help to put the fire out. And as you know, spicy foods can induce sweating, accelerate the heart rate, all kinds of system-wide changes can take place. So in essence, these pain receptors respond when you're drinking something that's too hot, for example. Maybe it's a coffee that's like scalding hot, and these pain receptors tell your brain, hey, back off. The same thing is happening. It's triggering the same receptors with spicy food, but it can be just enough where it's like, oh, this is a little bit too hot, or maybe too hot, or maybe extremely hot, and it gets painful, but it's nothing that's actually, because that pain receptor with something that's physically hot, for example, is trying to make sure that you don't melt your tongue or melt your biology, all the cells in your mouth. But the capsaicin can't actually do this, not actually melting anything, but it tricks your receptors into thinking that that's what's happening. Now, when these pain sensors get triggered, this also stimulates the release of endorphins, right? These feel-good compounds. This is part of the reason that spicy foods can be so attractive. They, in a strange way, make us feel good. Another interesting fact is that not only do different people have extremely different tastes and experiences as far as like feelings associated with food, but different animals sense flavors and stimulations from food differently as well. For example, it appears that birds don't register the effects of capsaicin like mammals do. Birds can peck on the hottest of hot peppers and not be bothered. All right? It's as if they evolved alongside some kind of a partnership with hot peppers, so that the birds, because they're flying to different places, dropping off those leftovers from the peppers, dropping off those seeds, and they created like a little bit of a partnership. because it's tricking your brain into thinking that it's physically hurting you, but it's not. All right, but for birds, they don't seem to be bothered. Now, again, birds can have the hottest of the hottest peppers. I remember I was at this restaurant and I was with some, weird, like get along gang type of eclectic. I didn't know how I ended up there. All right. And we had the meal. Then at the end of the meal, they brought this little plate and it had this drop of fluid right in the middle of the plate, like a little sauce, like a little like dark burgundy sauce and a bunch of toothpicks. And I'm just like, what is this? This is already weird enough. The whole vibe of the thing is weird enough. I was traveling in from St. Louis to LA, funny enough. And this was probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. So much stuff was new to me. And so people start picking up the toothpick, people who were affiliated with this experience, and dipped it into the little dollop of sauce. Like it was tiny. It was like the size of smaller than a dime. Dipped it into the sauce and then put it on their tongue. And I'm like, I guess when in Rome, I guess. And so I did it. And then I put the dollop on my tongue. And it felt as if I was getting a full body tattoo once that stuff hit my tongue. And come to find out, it was some like crazy exclusive ghost pepper or some other kind. I don't even remember the name. What's beyond a ghost? It was a freaking, I don't know, vampire pepper. All right. It was like a whole different level. And I was like, how is this thing touching my tongue, making me feel stimulation on my skin, like on my arms? And so again, for us, we're getting this kind of interaction. And while a bird can consume, like literally just straight up eat one of those peppers, that just a little teeny bit of the fluid from it affected my body. So just keep that in mind, little fun fact. But how does this actually play out? Now, we're not talking about stuff that is like physically causing trauma to your body. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a little bit of spice. Let's keep it a little spicy. What kind of benefits can we extract from this unique compound? Well, a study published in the peer-reviewed journal Nutrients found that capsaicin supplementation actually improved risk factors for coronary heart disease, protection against heart disease. All right, that's really interesting that it has that kind of capacity. Well, there's another study that was published in 2016 where scientists concluded that capsaicin is actually able to increase the body's ratio of brown adipose tissue. It can actually help to nudge beige fat cells that can either become white adipose tissue, which is storage body fat, into being brown adipose tissue. So this is a type of body fat that burns fat. And again, we talked about these in depth on that episode detailing how metabolism works. So make sure to check out that episode after this one. But the bottom line is hot food, spicy food actually has this not just thermogenic effect where it's kind of increasing our metabolism temporarily, but literally shifting the ratio of body fat. So we got storage fats, we've got structural fats, and we've got fats that actually burn fat for fuel. So it's really, really cool stuff. Now, additionally, several studies have also noted capsaicin's incredible ability to help with pain relief. And this was really interesting too. A study from the Harvard School of Public Health found that people who eat spicy foods daily have about a 14% lower risk of death from all causes than people who eat spicy foods once a week. Now, the researchers analyzed the health and nutrition data from nearly 500,000 people in this particular study and found this interesting correlation. After accounting for several other influential factors, spicy food stood out somehow. Now, again, this isn't necessarily causation, but it's an interesting data point nonetheless. So spicy food is tied to improvements potentially with our body fat ratio, cardiovascular health, relieving pain, increasing endorphins, and also potentially adding to that recipe of extending our lifespan. Pretty cool stuff. So spicy foods, you can spice up just about anything. You could spice up adding peppers, and obviously it's something that's dried and used, like cayenne pepper, for example, for savory dishes, even combining it with sweet foods, having a little bit of cinnamon along with some chocolate and Cinnamon, for example, is actually something that's been utilized for quite some time. So we can think outside the box and utilize peppers, spicy peppers, cayenne pepper, and even whole peppers in different ways. All right, so again, from spicy to sweet, savory dishes, and just adding it in. If it feels good, add it in. A little spice. A little spice can go a long way. Now, next up in our venture into the strange relationship that certain foods have on our bodies is another common one that many people experience. Have you ever been snacking on some fresh pineapple and experienced some stinging in your mouth? Or maybe a little bit of like pins and needles sensation, or maybe even some weird numbness? Well, there's a unique enzyme in pineapple called bromelain that has the remarkable ability to break down protein. In your mouth, all the structures in your mouth are made from protein. Your body truly is made from protein. These are, quote, the building blocks that make up our physical structure. And so in your mouth, bromelain has the ability to digest protein and break down protein. So in essence, when you're eating that pineapple, it's trying to eat you back. So when we're having this situation, this hit me and I'll hit you back situation taking place with pineapple, this is happening in our mouth. And so the question for me came up, well, what about the rest of my body? Like, what about the downstream effects with the pineapple since it's digesting protein? But once it hits your stomach acids and other compounds actually render bromelain harmless. And in fact, it helps it to become a potent anti-inflammatory nutrient in our bodies, according to data cited in the journal Clinical Immunology. Now, you might be wondering why a journal dedicated to immunology is investigating this pineapple compound in the first place. Well, another study published in the journal Cellular Immunology found that bromelain can actually act as an immunomodulator in the body, helping the immune system to increase or decrease itself based on kind of an upper level intelligence, a modulation, instead of just this one lane, like what happens with synthetic drugs, for example. It pushes your immune system in one direction. It either increases the immune system performance or it suppresses the immune system. Foods like pineapple, like bromelain, appear to have an immunomodulating capacity where it helps your immune system to modulate and to go up if it needs to, or even go down if it needs to. And when we're talking about why would it need to go down? Well, what if we're having an excessive immune response, right? Or an autoimmune reaction? There can be some potential here. And this is what they're studying with bromelain being able to help the immune system to reach a state of homeostasis and balance and improvement overall. Now, there are many other benefits that are seen with pineapples in the data. Another one, this is conducted by researchers at the University of Southampton in the UK, found that bromelain can be an effective treatment for osteoarthritis. Pretty cool. And also, again, just overall, pineapple is very high in vitamin C and antioxidants, and this may lean into why it's helpful for the immune system somehow. But more research is being done. Food has these really interesting capacities. So pineapple is one that's pretty easy to utilize. It might be with your favorite yogurt, for example, dairy or non-dairy versions. It might be something that you're adding in a fruit, a fruit mix, right? A fruit cocktail. I mean, let me be 100. I used to hate pineapple because it would come in a little fruit cocktail that you get at school, and it always it was not yellow. It was like translucent white. Like it was just like, what is that? And just threw the whole vibe out. If I was trying to eat the peach, it had the peaches, the grapes in there. The pineapple just was suspicious to me. But that's not real pineapple, all right? Fresh pineapple. And so there are many different ways to add it in. So quote, fruit salad, or just eating some, snacking on it just, just alone, adding it to different dishes. Again, I mentioned that it's something that breaks down protein. So it's been used historically for like tenderizing meat, for example, right? So you might think of like the luau, right? Shout out to everybody listening in Hawaii right now and being utilized that way. And also there are some weirdos out there putting pineapple on pizza, but you didn't hear that from me. All right. Shout out to everybody who likes pineapple on pizza. It might be me. I might be one of those weirdos. Probably not, but There's definitely somebody in my household who's a fan of pineapple on pizza. Not saying it's me, but it might be. All right, so pineapple is another one of those foods that has a very strange interaction with our body, but it also has some really remarkable benefits once we dive into the data. Now, our final strange interaction with foods and the human body seeks to answer the question, how are processed foods able to taste like things that they're not? So, for example, there's not actually any grapes in the grape soda, and there's not actually any chicken in the tofu chicken nuggets. How are we able to make things taste like things that they're not? Now, when it comes to grape soda, for example, I'm saying grape soda because that was my vibe. All right, that Vess grape soda, from where I'm from, it's a hood classic. All right, so having that as like something that I would go to quite often, the grape, the fruit punch, the strawberry soda, but the grape in particular has a little bit of a vibe, an essence of grape to it, but there's 0% grape juice in the grape soda. How are we able to do that? And by the way, it doesn't have to be perfect. The flavor notes don't have to match up perfectly to muddy up the waters in how foods are communicating with your brain. So how are they able to do this? There's something called a gas chromatograph that's able to now, we've been able to isolate flavors, isolate chemicals that denote flavors in foods. So food scientists have been able to use technology to isolate specific chemicals in foods and then put those chemicals into other things to make those things taste like things that they're not. All right. So making a chip taste like, there's like the chicken and waffles flavored potato chip, right? All these different crazy things that we're able to do. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. Like the strawberry candy, the strawberry beverage doesn't have to taste exactly like a strawberry, but it's just enough to muddy up those waters of communication between the food stuff and your brain. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, we evolved eating food and having a very specific relationship to the flavors and nutrients in foods. And there's this phenomenon called post-ingestive feedback. All right, post-ingestive feedback. This is through our evolution. When we would consume a food, just say we consume a wild strawberry. When you would eat that wild strawberry, when our ancestors ate that wild strawberry, brought it into our system, this highly evolved intelligent system, your physiology, your brain, and the mind in all of your cells is literally just kind of pulling out its own metaphorical notepad and writing notes that when I just ate this food and had this flavor, this strawberry flavor, a wild strawberry flavor, I got some vitamin C. I got some copper. I got these particular amino acids. And it's just literally taking notes, taking stored biological memory of what it got when it got this flavor. All right, so there's a post-ingestive feedback. Once we ingested the food, we get this feedback that these are the nutrients that come along with that flavor. And so whenever our bodies would become deficient in those nutrients, our physiology, our brain, our body, every cell in our body, we knew where to get that nutrient, where to get those nutrients, because we would evoke a hunger or a craving for those foods. This is how cravings evolved. Cravings aren't a bad thing. This would dictate and determine and assist and support our food choices. But this highly evolved system has been manipulated by the food industry to make us crave all of these crazy things that have never existed before, and has, again, muddied up the water of this post-ingestive feedback, because now we have things that taste like other things, all right? And so there's another phenomenon called vanishing caloric density that's utilized by food scientists to manipulate our brains, because any strong flavor sensation, anything that really overwhelms your taste buds, we have a natural mechanism in our brains that trigger us to stop to the joy that we might be getting by having this food, to turn the pleasure off and start to make it not palatable. All right. So this is why, for example, you might not be able to eat a lot of fill in the blank food. So maybe it's that pineapple that we talked about earlier. There's only so much pineapple. Again, the pineapples have been kind of manipulated over time as well to be sweeter and all that stuff. But there would be a shutoff mechanism in our brain. Is like, okay, it's enough sugar. It's enough of these nutrients. And also, of course, the pineapple is going to start hurting you after a while anyways. So these are all in the natural rhythm of things. But with this vanishing caloric density, food scientists have found a way to make, for example, a Cheeto, right? To make a Cheeto, which is an incredibly potent flavor sensation, to only trigger stimulation of a certain category of brain cells. Just enough to tickle them just enough, then adding in some other notes over here and creating this perfect combination where you can keep eating it and eating it and eating it and not really even realizing that you've tore through a whole bag of these things, right? You might have consumed hundreds of calories, but your brain is essentially tricked into thinking that it hasn't gotten many calories at all, because it's another post-ingestive feedback is the amount of energy that's coming in from the food. And so your brain is even getting tricked, but like, this is just air, just some chewing on some air, right? Keep eating. So this is just another one of those ways that our interactions with food often go on behind the scenes. Like, why are we doing the thing that we're doing? Why do we have this relationship with these particular categories of foods that we call processed foods? What's happening there? What's happening behind the scenes? And these are one of the things that we really need to address as a culture to help to move away from these things, to restore optimal function, to restore that true post-ingestive feedback and our powerful relationship with food and what our bodies really need. Because the reality is we've been manipulated. These food manufacturers have been manipulating our systems and creating a situation where our systems and our biology and the release of these different feel-good chemicals and dopamine has really run amok. We didn't land on Cheetos. Cheetos landed on us. So if you saw this, you see I did the Denzel Washington finger if you saw that. But it's true. These things have really taken over our culture. And how do we fix it? This is so simple. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy because, again, it's immersed itself. It's really entangled itself into our culture. But a simple return to a healthy, quote, normal palate, normal interaction with real food takes place when we remove the abnormal foods. It's literally that simple. Healing starts to take place. Intelligence starts to reign supreme again. We remove the cause of the dysfunction. We know that our food choices deeply impact how we show up in our relationships. Absolutely. We've looked at that data. But our relationships also deeply impact the food choices we make. Study after study is demonstrating how our environment within our own household has a massive impact on our food choices, and how the simple act of eating together as a family can influence our health. For instance, researchers at Harvard University recently uncovered that people who consistently eat dinner with their families frequently consumed more fruits and vegetables and less processed foods and soda. Their data analysis also showed that families with increased frequency of family dinner also had higher intakes of several key nutrients that support health and defend the body against diseases. Specifically, eating together as a family increased consumption of fiber, calcium, folate, iron, B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin E, lowered glycemic load, and lowered the intake of low-quality fats. This result was simply from eating together as a family. It's not just what you eat, it's who you're eating with that changes our association with food, that changes our food choices, that changes our health. Another study cited in the journal Nutrition, Education, and Behavior found that children who ate breakfast with their family at least 4 times a week were more likely to consume ample fruits and vegetables. Now, the question is why this is. It really has to do with the structure, intentional meal planning involved, and the elimination of distractions that are some of the major reasons that this could be having such a big impact on our health. The study went on to report that children whose TV was never or rarely on during family meals were significantly less likely to consume soda and chips, and children who consumed breakfast, lunch, or dinner with their family at least 4 times per week, on average ate at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables the vast majority of days each week. Now, what's specifically interesting about this study is that it was incorporated using data from minority children who generally live within the construct of low-income communities. And this shines a subtle but hopeful light that even if we don't yet have access to the best food options, creating and sustaining a new family ritual of eating together more often can dramatically improve the health outcomes of the family, which includes the children, but also the parents as well. I can really identify with this one because growing up, oftentimes we would eat at the same time, but we very rarely ate together. It was more like a free-for-all. Food would be done, or the fast food would come in, and then we would get food and we'd just find somewhere to sit, oftentimes in front of the television, video game. My brother and sister and I would eat together very often, but I can count on my hands how many times I ate together with my family, with my mother and my stepfather, literally on my hands, outside of maybe some holidays. Like, it just wasn't a part of our culture. And so, like, I can really identify with this one and the impact it could potentially make, because the times we did sit down is where more intention was put into the food. And by the way, this doesn't mean that you have to make the food all the time, but just even if you're ordering out, even if you're hitting up the app and getting something delivered, sitting down and eating together, the dinner table is a unifier. It really helps us to connect. And there's so many associated benefits there with a relaxation of the sympathetic nervous system and activation of the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system, reduction in stress. We've got some data on this as well. And by the way, all of these studies are coming from my book, Eat Smarter. If you don't have a copy yet, you seriously need to have this book in your hands. All right, so pick it up anywhere that books are sold. And of course, you can check out the audio version as well. It's a very, very powerful, dynamic, fun book as well. Now, I want to dig a little deeper here, share a couple more studies. Children and adolescents are at vulnerable life stages for the development of environment-fostered obesity. And this is according to data published in the Journal of the American Medical Association Network and the journal Pediatrics. Now listen to this. Children and young adults who share family meals just 3 or more times per week are far more likely to be in a healthy weight range and more likely to have a healthier diet and eating patterns than those who share fewer than 3 family meals together. Additionally, and this is incredibly important, these children were far less likely to engage in disordered eating. So, how do we use this? The marker here, where we're setting the bar, is simply 3 meals together each week. And it could be any meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever it is. Just sitting down together, make that a mandate. 3 a week to see these benefits really manifest. And we're imbuing these habits into our children that they'll be then able to take on with their families as well. So incredibly important, incredibly powerful, and incredibly protective for our families. Now, the truth is, our environment shapes our tastes, food preferences, food accessibility, mental and emotional relationships with food, and overall eating behaviors long before we become aware of it. Truly, our environment is fostering and cultivating these things within us. Knowing this and addressing our nation's issues around food and our issues around eating behavior solely at the point of personal choice is a major problem. We have to address the environment. Today, millions of people are born into communities in the United States, and I'm one of them, inundated with substandard food, processed food, fast food, and eating practices that have been proven to be flat out deadly. When I lived in Ferguson, if when I left my apartment complex, as soon as I leave the gate, across the street, there's a liquor store there. And on the other side of the street, there's Lee's Chicken. There is Papa John's Pizza. There's Domino's right next door to that, Taco Bell, and there's a McDonald's. And across the street, moving down past the intersection, we've got a Chinese food restaurant, Dairy Queen, but it's not a Chinese food restaurant, like nice sit down vibe. We're talking bulletproof glass. We're talking, you don't know what they're cooking that in. You don't know what it is. All right. That's that kind of, all right. That's the kind of Chinese food that I'm talking about. Much lower quality, substandard, low quality ingredients. All right. That, again, sold at the cheapest prices because it's just not good for you. Then if I go down the street just a little bit, I've got Steak and Shake. If you got a few extra dollars because the burger's a little pricey, they put the name Steak Burger in there, so it makes it more fancy. We've got Arby's, Krispy Kreme, Burger King, another McDonald's, another Chinese food place. And this one doesn't have bulletproof glass, though. That was a little nicer in there. That's the one I would frequent. And we've got Wendy's, if you want to get a square burger for some reason. Jack in the Box, Pasta House, if you want to like get a whole vibe going. That's where you take the ladies to the Pasta House. All right. But if they got the little thing where it vibrates, you got to wait in line with the vibrate thing. I don't know if that's the fanciest dinner, but hey, that's when I was balling. You balling out, you hit the Pasta House. And all of this is just within like a mile of my apartment, a mile and a half. Are you kidding me? I didn't know what Whole Foods was. It didn't exist. There was one Whole Foods in all of St. Louis. I don't know when it was built, but here in LA, it's like you could throw a stone and hit a Whole Foods, but St. Louis, yeah, it was one, but it was nowhere near me. Nowhere near me. Gyms, please. Yoga studio, come on. None of that existed. And as a matter of fact, parks, it might be, it's risk. It's a risk. You don't know what can jump off. Like the environment itself was not conducive to wellness. So today, millions of people are born into these conditions and then they get blamed for their health problems. Blaming the victim who how can I eat healthier if I don't know it exists? I didn't know it existed. To me, I just grew up in conditions. We just ate food. I didn't know there was a difference. We just ate stuff. We ate stuff that tasted good. End of story. I had no idea my food affected my health. I had no idea my food affected my asthmatic condition or my spine or any of that stuff. I didn't know. But now that we know, we can change it. And we can change these conditions. We got to start with ourselves, start with our own families, and then we can start to integrate that out in the community. It's not too soon to start paying it forward, because no matter where you are right now, no matter where you are, there's always somebody who's a little bit behind, who's a little bit further behind you in this domain that you can help and serve and uplift them in health. There's always somebody. But again, you got to start with yourself, because when you start feeling better, we become more capable of serving others. So how is this a thing? How is this even possible? I wanted to really articulate this in Eat Smart and bring this out to the public and audiences who normally wouldn't get this information. With Eat Smarter having a national campaign with Target stores, for example, being in all the Target stores across America and having this cool little feature and just all the different places that the book was at, people got an opportunity who normally wouldn't see this kind of information, but in a way that makes sense, that's fun to read and to learn about. But I wanted to share this. It's one of the most important reasons that I wrote this book, underlying and opening this conversation up as to how is this possible? How is it that the reason that my mother, if she would go and sell her blood to get $20, $25 to feed her children, And instead of being able to buy some avocados and some fish because it's too expensive, if that avocado might cost $3, when she can get 3 burgers for her children, how is that even possible? The avocado literally can fall off of a tree. These burgers are so cost intensive to make, it's absurd. How is it possible we can get 3 cheeseburgers for the same price of 1 avocado? And this goes to subjects in economics, elasticity of demand, all those things. But here's the bottom line principle. A big reason that this is possible is thanks in large part to government subsidy programs that provide government assistance to these processed food companies. And so I wanted to look at, can we actually get some real tangible data demonstrating that these government subsidies are leading to higher rates of disease in our communities? And I found it. From 1995 to 2010 alone, it's gotten far worse since. But I was able to track this data down. The US government handed out nearly $200 billion in agricultural subsidies to support the production of major commodity crops and farm foods that largely show up through the drive-through window. So the high fructose corn syrup, the genetically modified dwarf wheat, the things that are in everything, the soy, that are coming through the drive-through window. Now, I wanted to find out again the most verifiable impact that these subsidies have on communities. The most glaring example was highlighted in a recent study published in the peer-reviewed journal JAMA Internal Medicine, so the Journal of the American Medical Association Internal Medicine. The researchers set out to find if higher consumption of these foods derived from government subsidies is associated with adverse risk to U.S. citizens. The results were shocking. After adjusting for age, sex, socioeconomic factors, and other variables, the researchers found that those who had the highest consumption of government-subsidized foods had almost a 40% greater risk of being obese. The people who ate the most of these government-subsidized foods had almost a 40% greater incidence of being obese. They were also significantly more likely to have excess belly fat, higher levels of blood sugar, and higher levels of inflammation measured by C-reactive protein. The government assistance programs for farmers may have started off with good intentions to feed Americans, but over the years, the funds have been doled out in mass to farmers growing wheat, corn, which is used to make sweeteners and for feed for cattle, and that's a whole mess there with the conventional beef industry, and other government subsidized crops that are grown at mass quantities that are used in the making of processed foods. The result of these twisted government subsidy programs, doling out all of this money in mass to companies that are using these products for processed foods, is that fruits and vegetables cost a hell of a lot more, and you can ball out till you fall out on the dollar menu. It's all structured in that way. This is why it's possible. Researchers at the Yale University School of Medicine chimed in on the disparaging circumstances many low-income communities face when it comes to finances and health. In a study cited in the journal Diabetes Care, the researchers asserted that fast food and processed food is widely available at low cost, enabling it to compromise a greater proportion of the diet of low-income individuals. Their analysis revealed that being born into a low-income environment dramatically increases their risk of obesity, which in turn increases their risk of staying in poverty. So many people are trapped in this system. They have no idea that this environment is controlling their livelihood, their health, their ability to make it out of the environment, or the ability to make the environment better. It's being hindered by companies who are making billions of dollars off the farming of sick people. Because the Food and Drug Administration is supposed to be regulating food and drugs. But the funny thing is, everybody's getting paid off of our citizens and our children being sick. They're making massive money off of us being sick. They're not making money off of us being well. We got to wake up. That's the reality that we exist in. And we're looking to these entities right now to save us from pandemic conditions and ignoring so many of our citizens. They have no idea that these pandemic conditions are largely predicated upon the pre-existing level of disease that we already had. The CDC report, the most latest CDC report, found that 95% of the people who lost their lives with SARS-CoV-2 on the death certificate, with COVID-19 on the death certificate, had an average of 4 pre-existing chronic diseases and or comorbidities. But we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the underlying health issues that make us more susceptible to this and all manner of infectious diseases. It's not a part of the conversation because they don't give a shit. Why would they? The system is not built in that way. I'm talking about the system itself, not the people within it, because the people within it are trained in a way of thinking by that system to believe that the drug is going to save the person, to believe that there's nothing that this person can do to get healthier, to believe that this person isn't going to listen. It's their fault, not understanding that if they're born into the circumstances, as the study said, and I'll reiterate this, their analysis revealed that being born into low-income environments dramatically increased the risk of obesity, which in turn increases their risk of staying in poverty. And they blame them. Oh, they're not going to listen anyways. It's too bad people aren't going to take action to get themselves healthier. What about the environment? Now, there is a level of personal responsibility. And in closing for this episode, we're going to dive in and talk about some of the specific strategies that we can do to help to change all of this. Number one, we really need First and foremost, we need top-down change and bottom-up change. So top-down change, structural, societal. Bottom-up change, personal accountability and action of the individual. From the bottom up, these aspects of personal responsibility for change include getting ourselves educated, right? But even with that, we need exposure. We need to know that it's a possibility to get educated. We need to be in a way that the education becomes attractive. Because I know many people, after they graduated college, they're like, I'm not reading again. Or even graduated high school, like, I'm done with books. I'm done. I'm not going to learn stuff. That's for school. But we all want to learn. We all want to continue to learn. It's how humans evolved. Like, that's built into us. We want to learn. We want to explore. We want to create. But those natural human expressions and tendencies can get suppressed by the environment and by being inundated with so much distraction, so much brain candy, where we rather watch someone else's greatness on TV than embark on our own. We can change this, but we got to become aware of it. So education, that's what changed it for me. That's what changed it for me. Personal investment as well. We've got to invest in ourselves. It's the greatest investment that we can ever make. These are bottom-up change. These are pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Like, have you ever actually seen somebody do that? We need to stop saying that. Pull yourself up from your bootstraps. What? You can't. Unless you're like in an anti-gravity chamber or something. I don't know. Like, you can't pull yourself. Never mind. Body fat itself. Your fat is an organ. All right, body fat is an organ. We tend to think about it like it's just scattered droplets of stuff throughout our body, scattered droplets of unhappiness, sometimes scattered throughout our bodies. But it really, your fat cells and your fat cell communities, which we're going to talk about, they work together as an organ. Much like your skin is an organ that really spreads and moves throughout your body and is a big part of your nervous system. Your body fat is a huge part of your endocrine system, all right? It works together much like an organ. Your body fat releases hormones and other substances to regulate your body's metabolism by communicating with other organs and tissues, such as your liver, your pancreas, your muscles. And this introduces a critical but overlooked point in how this process actually works, in that your body fat itself is largely responsible for regulating your metabolism. Your body fat itself is largely responsible for whether it's, quote, burning itself. All right. So your body fat can function kind of like a stuntman, I guess, lighting itself on fire. All right. But again, it's much more dynamic than that. But it's just the point that I want to bring forth is that your body fat itself is a major player in your endocrine system in regulating hormones and the communication with all your fat loss and fat storage related hormones and neurotransmitters and neuropeptides. It's this beautiful dynamic web, this beautiful dynamic picture, and we're going to continue to unpack what that is. Now, there are different types of fat cell communities. Just like any kind of civilization, there's different communities. All right, you've got your suburban, you got your urban, you got your country community. There's all kinds of communities. Just like with our body fat, there are certain body fat cell communities. But first, let's unpack a little bit about the individual in the fat cell community, which is the fat cell itself. The fat cell itself, it's called a fat cell because of its uncanny ability to store fat. You guessed it, fat. And fat cells can actually expand their volume more than 1,000 times their size. All right, when we're born, we have a certain amount of fat cells kind of in our cards, in our genetic destiny. And as we go through childhood and adolescence, and once we get to the age of about 20, the number of body fat cells that you have are just about the same number that you're going to have throughout your lifetime. All right, I know this sounds crazy because we think that we're growing and building more fat, creating more fat cells. But what's really happening is the fat cells themselves are just getting more filled with contents. And again, it can expand over 1,000 times its size. All right, so these fat cells are like some hefty cinch sacks. All right, they're like Santa's sack. All right, you know, Santa can stuff that sack full of gifts. All right, so it just expands. Just thinking about a couple Christmas movies. Shout out to Christmas. All right, so that's what's really happening when we're talking about gaining weight and, quote, growing fatter or growing fat. It's not the fact that we're just starting to haphazardly create more body fat cells, which that is possible, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But more often, we're talking about the fat cells themselves becoming filled with more and more storage, more and more energy, right? More and more potential energy to be used and packed away for a rainy day, because that's what the fat cells are designed to do. It's an incredible evolutionary adaptation that humans have developed that it really enabled us to make it this far and to become the people that we are today. It's thanks in large part to our incredible fat. But we see fat as the enemy. But fat has enabled us to survive when food isn't around. Now, the rub is that today, food is always around. For most people here in this civilization, we've got 24 access to food. You know, even though I grew up on food stamps and we were getting food from, food pantries and charities, and we were on the WIC program and all these different places to get food, we still had a lot of food, a lot of calorically dense food. Now, please preface, if you don't know this part of the story, make sure to listen to the episode or watch the episode where we did breaking down the history of the calorie and the epigenetic controllers of calories, all right? Because calories are not the tip of the spear when it comes to metabolism and the regulation with food. All right, so make sure you listen to that episode. So I'm just going to take it into consideration. You've already got that piece locked in. And of course, we'll also put it for you in the show notes if you happen to miss that episode. It's very important to understand it because when I went to my private, expensive university, I was taught very first day of nutritional science class that calories were king. Calories are the tip of the spear. If you can control your calories and manage calories, you can manage your metabolism. And that story is more one-sided than an elephant sitting on a seesaw with a chihuahua. all right, is way out of balance. All right, so make sure to check that out. But to dive more into this component of it, all right, so we know that the fat cell is storing a lot of energy, a lot of potential energy to be used for a rainy day. Our fat cells are just really, really good at doing this job. It's just so good at storing fat because that's what its role is. And it's also good at releasing that fat for energy when things are in balance and when it's needed. It just has to get the signals to do that job. And again, we're going to keep drilling down into what that looks like. But I just want to give you a brief summation of what's happening when we think that we're, quote, gaining weight or gaining fat. What we're really doing is just filling the fat cells themselves with more content. Now let's unpack, and or should I say pack, what is actually going into the fat cell? What is actually getting stored in the fat cell, enabling it to store energy and or grow? And what's getting packed into our fat cells themselves, and by the way, our fat cells, also called lipids, sometimes they're called adipocytes, they're mainly packed with or composed of these tiny packets of stored energy called triglycerides, all right? But they're also known as triacylglycerols, all right? That's another name for it, or tags is a short for that. Like, tag, gotcha, you fat. Shout out to tag. What happened? Do you remember tag? Like, first you start with the basic tag, which is like, you know, you tag somebody and run. Then you get more evolved. You get to that freeze tag. Do you remember freeze tag? You know, somebody tag you and then you frozen. You're like, Billy, come on, freeze me. It's just incredible. Good times. Do you know that tag has actually been banned in some schools? True story. But that's for another day. All right, that's for another day. But triacylglycerols, all right, that's not the name that we're going to use because I think it sounds a little bit provocative. Triacylglycerols. So triglycerides, that's what's actually getting packed into the fat cells, enabling them to grow. And triglycerides each consist of 3 fatty acid molecules attached to a single glycerol molecule. All right, so these fatty acids, 3 of those with 1 glycerol. That's why it's called triglycerides or triacylglycerol. Now, what's really crucial to understand is that our fat cells literally join together in fat cell communities. So now we know what's actually getting packed into the cell. Now we know the role that the fat cell is playing because it's really based on survival. It's just doing the job it's programmed to do. But our fat cells function together in communities, just like any communities here on the planet. You've got different types of communities who do different things. And so the first community that we're going to talk about are when we're talking about, quote, burning fat, we are largely targeting and talking about what are known as storage fats, okay? Storage fats. And the first type of storage fat we're going to talk about is subcutaneous fat, all right? Subcutaneous fat. Now, subcutaneous fat is the fat cells that are stored just beneath your skin, all right? It's the fat cell community just below your skin, and it's able to store caloric energy, padding your muscle. All right, so the fat on the back of your arms, on your thighs, on your booty, all right, padding your muscles. If you've ever taken a fall, if you've ever fallen on your rump shaker, you got subcutaneous fat to thank for the little cushion, all right? So this is a type of subcutaneous fat, and it also helps to regulating your body temperature and also serving as a pathway for your nervous system and blood vessels moving throughout your body, you know, from your skin to your muscles and all that communication. Subcutaneous fat is incredible. It has incredible job and incredible intelligence. Now, our ability to store subcutaneous fat, again, it's an evolutionary advantage that has enabled us to store energy that can be used during times of food scarcity. All right, so that's the first type of storage fats is subcutaneous fats. Any of these fats can get out of hand, all right? So number 1, subcutaneous fat. The next type of storage fat is called visceral fat, all right? Visceral fat, also known as omentum fat. Omentum, which is derived from, I believe it's the Latin word meaning fatty apron, all right? Fatty apron. Who knew? All right, visceral fat has been found. Now, this is the type of fat that, unlike your subcutaneous fat, which you can have subcutaneous fat on your belly as well, that's the stuff you can pinch. The visceral fat is that deep abdominal fat. It's the fat that's really pressing upon and putting pressure on your internal organs. All right. So it's like really cramming up space with your guts, with your pancreas, with your liver, that deep abdominal fat. And the most important piece here that I want to talk about with visceral fat is that it's been found to contribute most often of the different types of fat cell communities that we're talking about. Visceral fat has been found to contribute more to diabetes and insulin resistance than other types of fat by far. And this is based on data published in the Journal of the American Heart Association, affirm that carrying extra visceral fat substantially increases your risk of heart disease and having a heart attack as well. So it's no joke. All right, visceral fat, if it gets out of hand, it can be problematic. But again, it's an adaptation that we developed to store energy that we can use in times of need. So we've got subcutaneous storage fat. We've got visceral storage fat. Now, another one that a lot of folks don't know about, and when I was in school, again, I was taught that fat and muscle are dichotomous. Like you're just trying to burn fat, build muscle, burn fat, build muscle, right? That's the marketing. So you're led to believe that these two things are dichotomous, but they're really intersecting, but they're really attached, but they're really working together. And this is highlighted perfectly in this next type of storage fat, which is called intramuscular fat. All right, intramuscular fat. This is our third major type of storage fat. Intramuscular fat is used as on-site energy by your muscles for you to do basic movements. So even when I just moved my arms just now, thank you, intramuscular fat. It's being used as on-site energy to move our bodies. It can also really act as your muscle's right-hand man. And seemingly though, this fat, even though it's kind of a right-hand man, it can get backup dancer syndrome too. You know, it can want to steal the show a little bit. And shout out to the background dancers who made it. You know, they hooked up with the lead artist. Shout out to Chris Judd. What happened to Chris Judd? He married J-Lo. Like, Kevin Federline. Kevin, where are you, man? I hope you're all right. He locked up Britney. All right. He's backup dancer. Made it to the foreground. All right. So this muscle can try to steal the show as well. And boy, they stole the show for a minute there. But again, this type of fat is also incredibly valuable and helpful when it's in balance. Now, researchers at the Boston University School of Medicine affirm that notable increases in intramuscular fat lead to measurable decreases in insulin sensitivity. All right, this is bad news. When we get into how this process of fat loss is actually working, in the conversation of insulin coming into it, you're going to understand more why this is problematic. All right, so intramuscular fat, same thing. If we're storing too much energy there and that muscle is becoming abnormally functional, we can start to run into some overall problems with our metabolism. All right, now to summarize, the three previous fat cell communities that we covered, subcutaneous, visceral, and intramuscular, are all fat communities that store energy. They store energy. And they're all in a class called white adipose tissue. All right, white adipose tissue, or what? All right, whereas when we get to our next community that we're going to talk about, you're going to learn about a type of thermogenic fat cell community that doesn't store fat, it actually burns it. And that fat that's really become headlined news today is brown fat, or brown adipose tissue, or BAT fat. In the dark of the night. No, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, sorry, somebody hit the bat signal. All right, now, brown fat is actually the subject of many studies right now because of its profound impact that it has on our metabolism. It's one of these evolutionary adaptations. Babies have a lot higher ratio of brown adipose tissue because it helps to really insulate the body, regulate temperature, and protect against hypothermia. All right, keeping us nice and warm and cozy. But as we get older, our ratio of brown fat diminishes. Again, this is a type of fat that burns fat for energy. And on a human adult, most of our brown fat is primarily found around our neck, our collarbones, our shoulder blades, upper back region, down along our spine. That's where we're going to have our pockets and spots of brown adipose tissue. But again, it's really a potent energy burning source. And it accomplishes this partly through a special protein called thermogenin. Now, again, as we get older, our ratio and activity even of brown adipose tissue can dramatically decrease. But there are certain things that we can do with our nutrition and lifestyle to increase our ratio of brown adipose tissue. Now, one of the big takeaways here, and this is published by the Garand Institute of Medical Research, and this is in my book, Eat Smarter. All of this stuff that we're covering today is in Eat Smarter. So make sure, if you have not read Eat Smarter, USA Today, national bestseller, what are you doing? You need to get this book like ASAP. Also, the audio book is available as well. This study was published by the Garand Institute of Medical Research, found that once activated, just a tiny amount of brown fat, 50 grams, just 50 grams of brown fat, could burn an additional 300 calories of energy in a day. Simply upping your body's ratio by just 50 grams, this tiny little amount, instantly changes your metabolic rate and increases your body's ability to burn 300 more calories a day. These are these really interesting dynamics of our metabolism that was not taught to me in my conventional university education. And also, how can we actually influence our brown fat ratios? How can we influence the activity of our brown fat? And these are simply things that were not taught to me. And one of the most powerful takeaways about brown adipose tissue is the fact that it's brown. The reason that it's brown is that it's so dense in mitochondria. It's so dense in mitochondria, which is really an end point for this process of fat oxidation, or quote, fat burning, which we're going to talk about more, but I want to give you the heads up that brown adipose tissue is so dense in that end destination where fat is actually getting burned. It's one of the things that makes it really remarkable. All right, so that's another fat cell community. And we're going to share one more here on this angle of potential of what this fat cell community is actually doing. This one's a little bit different. And this fat cell community is a variable fat. It's a variable fat that can actually do different things. And it's called beige fat. All right, beige fat. Now, beige fat is the answer to the question, what if my white fat could get a tan? What if it could become a little bit more brown and do some different things, do some of the jobs that brown fat does? And beige fat is fascinating in that it actually appears to have the flexibility to act like either brown fat or white fat. All right, so it's flexible. It has that ability to pivot between two things, like Van Damme hitting that split. All right, it's able to do that, to bridge that, to have that flexibility and variability. According to scientists at Georgia State University, beige fat has potent potential to fight obesity in much the same way as brown fat by burning fuel rather than storing it. But beige fat is genetically distinct from brown fat. Brown fat cells are born from stem cell precursors that also produce muscle cells. Beige fat, on the other hand, forms within deposits of white fat cells from beige cell precursors. All right, now again, this is coming directly out of Eat Smarter. And there are certain things that we can do with our nutrition and our lifestyle that influence the browning of these beige fat cells and also the activity of our brown fat, which we're going to get to a little bit later in the show. But first, we've got to understand how this process of fat loss actually works. But to understand that piece, we've first got to understand how the fat is getting stored in the fat cell in the first place. Now, a lot of folks don't realize this, but it's estimated that the average lean adult male stores about 130,000 calories in fat on their frame. All right, 130,000 calories in fat stored on the average lean adult male. And that is enough energy to sustain life for the average person for approximately 65 days. All right, 65 days. Now, excessive fat storage obviously can be unhealthy. It can be problematic. This can bump into issues with, performance and with confidence and all these other aspects of psychology that come into play. But most importantly, we're talking about health and having that foundation of health. Seeking to be healthier can have an outpicturing of changes to our body composition and the things that we would kind of attribute towards having a healthy physical culture. Now, with that said, once we start to venture into obesity, we'll be storing hundreds of thousands more calories and fat on our frame. Tremendous amounts of energy. And again, an average adult male, that's 65 days of energy. Just imagine how much energy is stored once we venture into that domain. And, you know, coming up from the environment that I lived in, most of my family was obese. And this is just what was a norm coming from where I'm from. And part of the reason that I do this work that I do is that I love my family and there's so many good people. We just didn't know. We didn't have this education. We didn't know how any of this stuff worked. The distance of our knowledge would range from our eyes to the television screen telling us to do a Slim Fast shake if we want to lose weight. All right? Shake for breakfast, one for lunch, and a sensible dinner. What is sensible? What does that even mean? Sensible for who? There's a lot less sensibility today. All right? But that's the scope of our education. We don't understand how these processes work. And I want to empower people to understand how our bodies work and how powerful food is at driving and controlling these processes. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today. Somewhere around 70% of the United States population is on prescription drugs. Your liver is handling that shit. And also your liver is responsible for food, food metabolism, that interaction as well. And the name, liver,